You've been lied to about acceptance. They told you it comes when life finally goes your way, when people treat you the way you want, when every problem is solved. But if that were true, why do so many who seem to have it all still feel restless, anxious, and unsatisfied? Why do you still find yourself fighting reality, wishing things were different, waiting for the perfect moment that never comes? The truth is, acceptance isn't something you stumble upon in the outside world. It's something you grow from within, and Buddhism holds the map. For centuries, monks, sages, and everyday people discovered how to stop struggling with life and start flowing with it. They learned how to breathe through suffering, how to let go of clinging, and how to find freedom in the very moment they once resisted. And now, those same teachings can guide you too, not through denial, not through giving up, but through wisdom and practice that turn even your hardest experiences into teachers. Tonight, as you listen, something will shift. The battle in your mind will ease. The heaviness in your body will lighten. You'll begin to see that nothing needs to be controlled, nothing needs to be perfect, because acceptance itself is strength. This isn't just another talk to pass the time. This is a journey into the heart of Buddhism, a journey that can dissolve resistance, release old burdens, and open the door to freedom. Are you ready? Let's begin. They told you acceptance would come once you finally figured out who you are, once you reached success, once you managed to silence every problem. But here you are, still searching, still restless, still caught in the pull between wanting more and wanting to let go. There is a hidden reason why life feels so heavy, and it is not because you are broken. It is because the mind swings like a pendulum between extremes, pushing for perfection, then falling into indulgence. What if the way forward is neither side? What if the answer is in the quiet path that runs between them? The Buddha called this path the middle way, and it was the very first discovery after years of seeking. Before awakening, he had lived in palaces of pleasure, with every desire satisfied, yet the hunger of the soul was still there. Then he turned to the other side, starvation, self-punishment, denying the body every comfort. But suffering only grew sharper. Neither wealth nor denial opened the door to freedom. It was when he stopped chasing the extremes and walked the balance in between that he found liberation. And this is the lesson we are often blind to. Our culture praises perfectionism, the drive to always improve, always compete, always chase the next achievement. Yet when perfectionism rules us, no victory is enough. Each success becomes fuel for the next demand. The moment of joy collapses into anxiety. What if I fail? What if this is not enough? What if others do better? The very achievements that were supposed to set us free become chains. On the other side, indulgence whispers promises of rest. We fall into comfort eating, endless scrolling, chasing thrills, staying in bed instead of facing life. It feels sweet in the beginning but robs us of energy, clarity, and confidence. Soon we are trapped in the dull fog of excess, wondering why nothing satisfies for long. The middle way is freedom from this endless swing. It teaches that acceptance does not mean laziness, and discipline does not mean cruelty. It is the art of knowing what is enough, of listening closely to the body, the mind, and the heart, and acting with wisdom rather than impulse. In the middle there is space, space to breathe, space to act without compulsion, space to choose wisely. To understand this in daily life, think of how you treat your body. If you push too hard with exercise, trying to sculpt the perfect image, you break yourself down. If you neglect movement completely, drowning in comfort, the body weakens. The balanced path says, nourish with care, rest when tired, move when energy flows, and do not use the body as a battlefield for your ego. The same applies to food, starving yourself in the name of control, or drowning in constant indulgence, Both cut you off from acceptance. Eating becomes a practice when you taste each bite, stop when you are nourished, and listen to what your body truly needs. The middle way also reshapes how we work. Perfectionism tells you to work until you collapse, because anything less is failure. Indulgence tells you to escape into distraction, ignoring responsibility. Balance is learning to give your best with focus and heart, then letting go when the task is done. It means closing the laptop without guilt, walking away from the desk without the weight of unfinished business. Work becomes a practice of presence, not punishment. Relationships, too, are poisoned by extremes. Perfectionism demands constant approval, constant control, endless attempts to fix both yourself and the other person. Indulgence hides from intimacy, avoids the discomfort of honesty, and numbs connection with shallow pleasure. In the middle, love is steady. You give attention without losing yourself. You listen without demanding to be right. You care without needing to own. Acceptance in relationships is not clinging or withdrawal. It is allowing the other person to be as they are while you stand firmly in your own wholeness. The beauty of the middle way is that it is alive. It does not give rigid rules, it gives awareness. One day, balance may mean pushing yourself a little further. Another day, it means resting without guilt. One moment it means saying no, another moment it means opening to yes. It requires honesty, presence, and courage to hear the truth of what this moment needs, not what your cravings or fears demand. And here lies the heart of acceptance. True acceptance is not passive resignation. It is not shrugging and saying, "This is just how life is." It is actively choosing to meet life as it is without distortion. Perfectionism distorts reality by telling you that nothing is enough. Indulgence distorts reality by pretending pain does not matter. Acceptance clears both illusions. It says, "Here is this moment, imperfect and alive. Here is your body, not flawless and not broken, but breathing. Here is your heart, not invincible and not weak, but open." When you live this way, stress begins to lose its grip. You are no longer pulled like a puppet by endless desires and fears. Instead, you stand in the middle, watching them rise and fall without being consumed. In that space, clarity grows. Decisions become easier because they are no longer ruled by extremes. Joy grows deeper because it is no longer tied to fragile conditions. Even suffering softens because you are not adding resistance on top of pain. Think of a river flowing between two steep banks. If you cling to one side, you are trapped against the rocks. If you swing to the other, you crash again. But in the middle, the water flows freely, carrying you forward. The middle way is this flow, the gentle current that moves you toward freedom without forcing or resisting. It is easy to mistake balance for mediocrity, but balance is not boring. It is the most courageous path, because it requires you to let go of extremes that promise certainty. Perfectionism promises that if you just work hard enough, life will finally be safe. Indulgence promises that if you avoid discomfort, life will finally be easy. Both are lies. Balance offers no false guarantees. It only offers the raw truth of reality and the deep strength that grows when you stop running from it. So how do you walk this path each day? Begin small. Notice when you are swinging into extremes. Notice when you are criticizing yourself harshly, demanding more and more. Pause. Breathe. Ask, what would be enough in this moment? Notice when you are numbing yourself, chasing escape. Pause. Breathe. Ask, what would bring real nourishment right now? Slowly, the middle path becomes natural, like learning to ride a bicycle. At first you wobble, falling from one side to the other, but with practice, balance becomes second nature, and you move smoothly forward. The gift of the middle way is that it does not depend on anyone else. You do not need approval, achievement, or escape to feel whole. You carry the compass of balance within you, and every step you take can be guided by it. When storms come, you bend but do not break. When pleasures arrive, you savor without clinging. Life stops being a battlefield of extremes and becomes a dance of balance. And in that dance, acceptance flowers. Not as an idea, not as a distant goal, but as the way you meet each moment, steady, open, alive. Balance opens the doorway to a different truth, one that waits just beyond the stillness of the middle path. When you begin to release the grip of extremes, another question rises. Why does the heart still ache when things slip away, when people change, when time moves forward, no matter how tightly you hold on? The answer is not found in control, but in recognizing the law that governs everything. Nothing lasts forever. What seems solid today will shift tomorrow, and what feels unbearable now will one day dissolve. This truth of impermanence is not meant to crush the spirit. It is meant to free it. From the very first breath, change begins. The cells in your body die and are replaced. Your thoughts shift from moment to moment. The seasons turn, relationships evolve, feelings rise and fall. Everything is in motion. The problem is not impermanence itself, but our refusal to see it. We cling to youth as though it should remain untouched, to loved ones as though they will never leave, to moments of joy as though they should be preserved in glass. When life inevitably changes, we suffer, not because of the change, but because of the resistance to it. Buddhism teaches that acceptance of impermanence dissolves the fear of loss. When you know deeply that everything is in constant transformation, you stop demanding permanence from what cannot provide it. Instead of holding happiness like a possession, you hold it like a gift, beautiful because it will pass. A flower is precious not in spite of its short life, but because of it. If it bloomed forever, you would stop noticing its beauty. This insight applies to every part of life. Your childhood, your friendships, even your very breath are made meaningful by their fleeting nature. Impermanence also softens grief. When a relationship ends or a loved one passes away, the pain feels unbearable because you believed the bond was fixed. But when you remember that even the strongest bond is a dance of constant change, grief transforms. It does not vanish, but it opens into tenderness. You see that what once was will never return in the same form, but the love shared remains woven into who you are. By honoring impermanence, you allow yourself to feel sorrow without being consumed by despair. In daily life, clinging to permanence creates anxiety. You worry about losing your job, your health, your youth. The mind races, trying to build walls around things that cannot be held still. But once you truly understand impermanence, the fear begins to loosen. You realize that even loss contains a gift, because endings create space for beginnings. The closing of one chapter opens the possibility of another. A career ending may reveal hidden talents. A heartbreak may push you to discover deeper forms of love. Even illness, while painful, can awaken compassion and presence. The practice of impermanence is not a cold intellectual idea. It is something you can touch in each moment. Look at your breath. One inhalation rises, fills you, then dissolves into exhalation. If you try to hold the breath, you suffer. If you let it flow, the body is nourished. This is the same law that governs everything else. Letting each moment arrive and depart is the art of living with serenity. The Buddha often pointed to impermanence as the path to freedom. He would ask his students, "What is it that you cling to that has not changed? Is the body unchanged? No, it grows and declines. Are feelings unchanged? No, they shift like clouds. Are possessions unchanged? No, they come and go. By seeing clearly that nothing is fixed, attachment weakens. And when attachment weakens, suffering lessens. This truth can be frightening at first. If everything changes, what can we rely on? But this fear comes from misunderstanding. Impermanence is not emptiness in the sense of nothingness. It is the fullness of constant creation. Because things change, growth is possible. Because people change, healing is possible. Because life changes, wisdom is possible. If everything were frozen, nothing could ever improve. Impermanence is the silent teacher that shows us possibility hidden in every moment. When you embrace impermanence, gratitude deepens. A meal with friends is no longer casual. It is a fleeting gift, unique and unrepeatable. A morning sunrise is no longer ordinary. It is a painting that will never be painted again. Each laugh, each touch, each moment becomes precious because it cannot be recreated. Gratitude born from impermanence is stronger than gratitude born from abundance. Abundance can make us numb. Impermanence makes us awake. In relationships, clinging to permanence often fuels conflict. We want people to stay the same, to meet our expectations, to never shift. But people are not statues, they are rivers, always moving. By recognizing this, we learn to love with openness. Instead of trying to freeze someone into an image, we walk with them through their changes. Acceptance of impermanence is the foundation of compassion, because it allows us to meet others as they are in this moment, not as we demand them to be. Impermanence also reveals the futility of holding grudges. Anger feels eternal when it burns in your chest, but even anger is impermanent. It rises, peaks, and fades if you do not feed it. When you see this clearly, forgiveness becomes natural. Why hold on to something that is already dissolving? By letting go, you free yourself to move forward. In modern life, the denial of impermanence is everywhere. Cosmetic industries promise to erase age. Advertisements promise lasting happiness through possessions. Social media snapshots create the illusion of permanent moments. But beneath the surface, nothing is fixed. The more you chase permanence, the more exhausted you become. By contrast, embracing impermanence gives you energy, because you are no longer fighting against reality. Practicing impermanence can be done through meditation. Sit quietly and watch your thoughts. See how one arises, stays for a moment, and fades. Notice how another thought appears, and then another. No thought stays. Even painful emotions, fear, sadness, anger, rise and dissolve if you allow them. By watching this directly, you realize you are not your thoughts, and you are not trapped by them. You are the awareness in which they come and go. Another way to practice is through mindfulness of nature. Watch a tree as seasons change, leaves growing, falling, returning. Listen to the sound of rain. It begins, flows, and fades. Observe your own body aging over the years, shifting in strength and appearance. Each observation reminds you that life is motion, and that motion is beautiful. Acceptance of impermanence also helps you release control. Much of human stress comes from trying to manage what cannot be controlled: the opinions of others, the passage of time, the unfolding of events. When you see clearly that control is an illusion, you shift focus. Instead of forcing the world to be stable, you learn to adapt with grace. Like a tree in the wind, you bend, but you do not break. This is where serenity arises, not in clinging to certainty, but in flowing with change. Serenity is not numbness. It is a quiet strength that comes from knowing that whatever happens, it too will pass. Sorrow will pass, joy will pass, fear will pass. What remains is the awareness that receives them all without being shaken. Stories from Buddhist tradition echo this truth. When a grieving mother once brought her dead child to the Buddha, begging him to bring the child back, he told her to collect mustard seeds from a household untouched by death. She searched every home, but everywhere she went, death had touched someone. Through this search, she realized that death was not her personal curse, but the universal law of impermanence. In that realization, her grief softened and she began to heal. This story is not about cold acceptance, it is about liberation, through understanding that change is the common ground we all share. Impermanence also changes how we see failure. Instead of defining yourself by mistakes, you see them as temporary conditions, opportunities for growth. Failure is not the end of the story, but part of the unfolding. This perspective brings courage because you no longer fear setbacks as permanent marks. You see them as stepping stones that will transform over time. Even in moments of despair, impermanence holds a quiet promise. No storm lasts forever. No night endures without dawn. By remembering this, you find strength to endure hardship with patience. Hope is not forced optimism. It is the natural result of knowing that change is inevitable. Pain may not vanish instantly, but it will evolve, and in its evolution, new possibilities will appear. Living with impermanence also reshapes how you use time. Instead of wasting hours in distraction, you feel the urgency of life. You realize that each day is one less day you will ever have. This is not meant to create fear, but to awaken you to presence. When you understand that your time is limited, you begin to use it wisely, focusing on what matters, letting go of trivial worries, and choosing depth over noise. This awareness of impermanence leads to humility. No matter how great your achievements, they too will pass. No matter how high you rise, one day you will return to the earth. Far from being depressing, this humility is liberating. It keeps you grounded, reminding you that you are part of a vast cycle, not the center of the universe. And yet, impermanence does not erase meaning, it creates it. Meaning exists precisely because moments cannot be repeated. A song that played forever would lose its beauty. A life that stretched endlessly without change would lose its urgency. It is the fragility of existence that makes it precious. By embracing impermanence, you find depth in the ordinary and value in the fleeting. This understanding also opens compassion for all beings. When you see that everyone is subject to loss, aging, and death, you feel connected. You no longer judge harshly because you know that everyone struggles with the same law of change. Compassion grows naturally from this recognition, and with compassion comes peace. To live with impermanence is to live with open hands. You receive each moment fully, and when it passes, you release it gently. You no longer clutch desperately at what cannot be held, and you no longer resist what cannot be stopped. Life becomes lighter, freer, and filled with quiet joy. Acceptance is not found in chasing stability, but in embracing movement. The path of the middle way leads here to the recognition that balance itself depends on seeing impermanence clearly. Only when you stop demanding permanence from life can you step fully into its flow. And once you step into that flow, the fear of loss begins to dissolve, and serenity unfolds like a hidden flower, revealing itself in the heart that finally lets go. When you begin to see impermanence not as a curse but as the rhythm of life itself, the heart loosens. Loss no longer feels like punishment, but like part of a greater unfolding. Yet another question quietly appears. If everything is changing, what holds us together? What keeps the world from shattering into endless fragments? The answer lies in the truth of interbeing, the hidden web of connection that shows nothing exists by itself. To understand impermanence fully, you must also understand that every moment of change is shared, that you are not moving through life alone. Look closely at anything around you, and its connections appear. A sheet of paper holds the presence of the tree that gave its wood, the rain that fed the soil, the logger who cut the trunk, the worker who ran the mill, the sunlight that sustained the forest. Without sun, water, soil, and human hands, there is no paper. The same is true of every object, every person, every thought. What you call self is not sealed off from the world. It is the meeting place of countless conditions. You breathe because air enters. You eat because the earth provides. You live because others live. The line between you and the rest of life is thinner than you believe. This truth begins to dissolve the heavy sense of isolation that so many carry. Loneliness often feels like proof of separation, as though you are cut off from everyone else. Yet when you look deeper, loneliness itself rests on connection. The longing for others is born because your nature is to connect. The ache of loneliness is not emptiness. It is the reminder that you are woven into a web that you have temporarily lost sight of. By returning to awareness of interbeing, loneliness softens. You begin to feel supported, not by one person, but by the vast network of existence that makes your life possible. Every breath demonstrates interbeing. You release carbon dioxide, and plants receive it. They give back oxygen, and you inhale. Without them, you would not live. Without you, they would not thrive in the same way. This exchange is not metaphorical, it is literal, happening with every breath. How can you ever say you are separate when your lungs and the leaves of the forest are in constant dialogue? In relationships, interbeing transforms how you see others. Instead of viewing people as separate entities, you see them as part of your own life. The kindness of a stranger, the effort of a farmer, the love of your family, all of it lives in you. When someone hurts you, you recognize that their actions come from their own web of conditions, their own pains and struggles. This does not excuse harm, but it opens the door to compassion. You see that anger, fear, and cruelty are not personal enemies but ripples caused by suffering. By understanding interbeing, you respond not with blind retaliation but with wisdom, breaking cycles of harm. This insight also changes how you view identity. Modern culture pushes the idea of independence, of being a self-made person. Yet no one is truly self-made. Every step you have taken was shaped by teachers, friends, ancestors, and countless strangers. Even the language you use to think your thoughts is inherited. Interbeing reveals that the self is not a fixed island, but a flowing river of influences. This realization can be humbling, but it is also freeing. You no longer need to carry the crushing weight of being separate and alone in your struggles. You are part of something vast, and that connection itself is strength. Interbeing is not just philosophical. It has direct consequences for how you live. When you throw waste into the environment, you are not discarding it into somewhere else. It circles back through air, water, soil, and food. The suffering of the earth becomes the suffering of your own body. When you harm another person through words or actions, that harm reverberates back into your own heart, creating tension, regret, and bitterness. Likewise, when you cultivate kindness, the ripple touches others and returns to you, creating a cycle of healing. Awareness of interbeing makes every choice matter, not out of fear, but out of recognition that what you do to others, you also do to yourself. In meditation, interbeing becomes clear. As you sit quietly, you notice the body is not separate. The warmth in your skin comes from the sun that burned millions of miles away. The energy in your muscles comes from food grown in soil you never touched. The calm in your mind may come from a teacher long gone, whose words still echo through centuries. You realize you are a continuation of countless lives, and countless lives will continue through you. This perspective brings both humility and responsibility. You are small yet deeply significant because every action influences the whole web. Interbeing also addresses the fear of death. If you believe you are a separate self, death seems like absolute disappearance. But when you see that you are threads woven into a larger tapestry, death becomes transformation, not annihilation. Just as a cloud becomes rain, and rain becomes river, your life flows into new forms. The body nourishes the earth, your actions ripple through those you touched, your words live in the minds of others. Nothing is lost, it only changes form. Acceptance of this continuity dissolves the sharp edge of fear and replaces it with trust in the ongoing dance of life. One of the most powerful effects of interbeing is the expansion of compassion. When you see yourself in others and others in yourself, kindness is no longer a moral duty, but a natural expression. Helping another becomes helping yourself. Caring for the earth becomes caring for your own breath. This insight is at the root of the Bodhisattva ideal, one who seeks awakening not only for personal liberation, but for the liberation of all beings. Because in truth, there is no personal awakening separate from the awakening of the whole. Daily practice can bring this truth alive in simple ways. When you eat, pause and see the connections on your plate, the rain that watered the soil, the sun that nourished the crops, the farmer who worked, the truck driver who delivered, the cook who prepared. Gratitude naturally rises when you see this chain. When you speak to someone, pause and notice that their joy or suffering will not remain in them alone. It will ripple outward, touching you and others. Words carry the power to heal or wound the web. By choosing carefully, you weave harmony instead of discord. In times of isolation, remembering interbeing can sustain you. Even when physically alone, you are never separate. The air in your lungs has passed through countless others. The thoughts in your mind carry echoes of voices, books, songs, and stories shared across generations. The very atoms in your body were forged in ancient stars. You belong to the universe in ways deeper than companionship. Knowing this can calm the ache of solitude, turning it into reverence for the vast web that holds you. This awareness also transforms conflict. When disagreements arise, instead of seeing another as the enemy, you see them as part of the same fabric. Their well-being and yours are linked, even if your views clash. To harm them is to tear at your own fabric. Approaching conflict with this insight does not mean avoiding difficult conversations. It means approaching them with care, recognizing that healing the relationship also heals you. Interbeing also teaches patience. Because everything is connected, change often happens slowly, like ripples spreading in water. A single act of kindness may not show immediate results, but it plants a seed in the web, a seed that will bear fruit in time. Understanding this prevents despair when the world feels unchangeable. You see that every small action matters because it feeds the invisible network that shapes the future. Living with awareness of interbeing brings a quiet strength. You are no longer obsessed with proving yourself as separate or superior, because you see that your life is already meaningful as part of the whole. You no longer collapse under feelings of insignificance, because you see that even the smallest gesture reverberates. You are both humble and empowered, small and infinite, a single wave and the ocean at once. This truth leads back to acceptance. Accepting yourself does not mean glorifying the self as independent. It means recognizing yourself as a node in a vast network, complete only in relation to others. Accepting others means recognizing that their joys and struggles are not isolated from yours. Acceptance itself becomes deeper when you see life as a web rather than a collection of separate fragments. As you continue to walk the path, the insight of impermanence and the reality of interbeing support each other. Impermanence shows that everything flows. Interbeing shows that everything flows together. To resist change is suffering, but to resist connection is despair. To embrace both is liberation. When you accept impermanence, fear of loss fades. When you embrace interbeing, fear of loneliness dissolves. Together, they open the heart to serenity that is unshakable, because it does not depend on holding, clinging, or isolating. And so the practice unfolds. Walking gently, breathing deeply, speaking kindly, acting with awareness that you are not separate. Every step is a step for the earth, every breath a gift from the trees, every smile a spark of healing in the web. To live this way, is to live in truth, and in truth, acceptance becomes not a struggle, but a natural state of being. When the truth of interbeing settles in the heart, a subtle shift happens. You begin to sense that words, actions, and even thoughts ripple outward, touching the entire web of life. Yet with this realization comes a challenge. How often do we fill the space with noise, rushing to explain, defend, or persuade, without ever pausing to let silence reveal its power? Connection does not only happen through speech. Sometimes it is deepened in the stillness where no words are needed. This is where noble silence begins, not the silence of emptiness or withdrawal, but the silence that carries presence, clarity, and compassion. Silence is often misunderstood. Many fear it, equating it with awkwardness, rejection, or emptiness. In conversation, when words stop, anxiety often rises. What do they think of me? Am I boring? Should I fill this space? But noble silence is not the absence of communication. It is communication in its purest form. In silence, you are no longer distracted by rehearsed lines or defensive arguments. You listen with your whole being, not just your ears. Silence allows the truth beneath the noise to surface, both in yourself and in others. In relationships, silence can heal wounds that words cannot. Arguments often escalate because each person rushes to defend their position, piling words upon words. But when silence enters, the heat cools. The nervous system calms. In that pause, the deeper feelings, fear, longing, sadness have space to be felt. Noble silence does not mean refusing to speak. It means waiting until your words grow from clarity rather than reaction. It is choosing to speak only when the heart is steady, so that words become medicine instead of weapons. Silence also transforms inner dialogue. For many, the mind is a constant chatter of judgments, plans, worries, and regrets. It speaks endlessly, even when the body is still. By practicing noble silence, you begin to step back from this inner storm. You do not need to shut it down with force. You simply stop feeding it. By resting in quiet awareness, the noise begins to soften on its own. Over time, gaps appear between thoughts, and in those gaps, peace arises. This peace is not dullness. It is alive, vibrant, and deeply nourishing. Throughout Buddhist tradition, silence is seen as a teacher. When disciples asked profound questions, the Buddha sometimes responded with silence, not because he had no answer, but because some truths cannot be contained in words. Words divide, categorize, and limit. Silence allows direct experience. When you sit in silence, you encounter reality as it is, without filters. The breath, the body, the present moment reveal themselves more clearly when not drowned out by commentary. In a world driven by constant communication, noble silence is revolutionary. Phones buzz, notifications ring, voices fill every space. Rarely do we allow ourselves to simply be without input. Yet this constant stream of noise exhausts the mind and disconnects us from ourselves. Practicing silence, even for a short time each day, restores balance. It reconnects you to the quiet ground beneath all the noise, reminding you that your worth is not measured by how much you say or produce, but by how fully you are present. Silence also strengthens listening. True listening is impossible when your mind is busy preparing replies or forming judgments. By practicing silence, you train yourself to listen without interference. This kind of listening is a gift to others, because most people long not for advice, but to be truly heard. When you give silence, you give space for others to unfold, to reveal what lies beneath their words. In turn, your own understanding deepens, because you see beyond the surface into the heart of the matter. Inner silence reveals another gift: self-acceptance. When the inner critic falls quiet, you notice the raw simplicity of your existence. You are here, breathing, alive. You are not reduced to labels, accomplishments, or failures. In silence, the truth of your being shines without ornament. This acceptance cannot be forced through affirmations or external praise. It arises naturally when the noise subsides. In daily practice, noble silence can be woven into ordinary routines. You can begin by taking a few minutes each morning without speaking, just being with your breath before the day begins. During meals, you can eat without conversation or distraction, tasting each bite fully. When emotions flare, you can choose silence instead of reaction, letting the heat pass before responding. Over time, these small practices accumulate, transforming your relationship with yourself and others. Silence also deepens spiritual practice. In meditation, silence is the doorway to insight. When the mind quiets, subtle truths appear: impermanence, interbeing, compassion. These are not ideas but direct experiences felt in the body and heart. Silence is the fertile soil where wisdom grows. Without it, the seeds of insight remain buried under layers of noise. Yet noble silence is not withdrawal from life. It is not about isolating yourself or refusing to engage. It is about bringing stillness into engagement, so that your presence carries depth. When you speak, your words come from the ground of silence, giving them weight and clarity. When you act, your movements are not frantic but steady. In this way, silence becomes a companion, not an escape. There is also healing in shared silence. Sitting quietly with another person, without the need to fill space, creates a bond deeper than conversation. Shared silence communicates trust, presence, and acceptance. In such moments, the barrier of words falls away, and connection is felt directly. Families, friends, and communities can strengthen their ties by creating space for silence together, whether in meditation, meals, or simply sitting side by side without distraction. Silence also transforms suffering. Pain often grows louder when we resist it with endless commentary. This should not be happening. I cannot bear this. Noble silence allows you to meet suffering directly, without the extra noise of resistance. When you sit quietly with your pain, you notice that it shifts, changes, breathes. It is not a solid wall, but a wave that rises and falls. In silence, suffering becomes more bearable because it is held with presence rather than struggle. In the wider world, noble silence is urgently needed. Societies drown in arguments, debates, and noise, where everyone speaks but few truly listen. Silence, practiced collectively, can heal divisions. When communities pause in silence before dialogue, the energy changes. People approach each other with more openness and less aggression. Even moments of collective silence, such as mourning or remembrance, hold power to unite people beyond words. To embrace noble silence is to reclaim power over attention. Instead of scattering your energy across endless chatter, you gather it inward. This gathering does not close you off, but makes you more available. Because your presence is no longer diluted, you become a calm center in a noisy world, someone whose quietness carries strength rather than weakness. This silence does not erase expression, it refines it. When you do speak, your words carry clarity. When you remain silent, your presence communicates trust. Silence becomes a language of its own, one that often says more than speech ever could. It teaches you that communication is not about the quantity of words, but the quality of presence. Over time, noble silence reshapes your entire way of being. You begin to value pauses as much as action, listening as much as speaking, presence as much as doing. You live less from reaction and more from awareness. Acceptance grows naturally, because you no longer resist the silence within or around you. Instead of fearing it, you rest in it, discovering that silence is not empty, it is full of life. When seen in this light, silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. It is a return to the ground of being that underlies all words, all actions, all thoughts. In silence, you meet yourself, others, and the world more deeply. And in that meeting, serenity blossoms not because life has become easier, but because you have discovered the strength that arises when you no longer fear the quiet. When silence begins to speak its own truth, you realize something profound. The voice you thought was yours, the constant stream of I and me, is not as solid as you believed. In the quiet, the self you defend, the identity you polish, the image you fear losing, these start to dissolve like mist. What remains is not nothingness, but a freedom that comes from seeing the self as fluid, shifting, dependent on conditions. To touch this emptiness is not to feel lost. It is to feel released from the endless struggle of protecting an identity that was never fixed in the first place. Most people live under the weight of a constructed self. From childhood, labels are given: clever, shy, strong, weak, good, bad. Over time, these labels fuse into a story. Who you are, what you can do, what you deserve. You spend years defending that story, polishing it when praised, repairing it when criticized, hiding it when ashamed. Yet beneath the story, there is no permanent essence to be found. You are not the same child who first learned to walk, nor the same adolescent who felt their first heartbreak, nor the same adult listening to these words now. The body has changed, the mind has changed, the personality has changed. If you search for an unchanging self, you will not find it. Buddhist wisdom calls this anatta, the absence of a fixed, independent self. This does not mean you do not exist. It means you exist as a process, not as a solid entity. Just as a flame depends on fuel, oxygen, and conditions to burn, so too does the sense of self depend on body, thoughts, memories, relationships, and environment. Remove any of these, and the self shifts. It is never a thing. It is always an unfolding. This insight can feel unsettling at first. If there is no solid self, who suffers, who rejoices, who lives, but look closer. Suffering becomes sharper when you cling to an identity. I am a failure. I am unlovable. I am broken. These statements harden into walls that trap you. When the self is seen as fluid, these walls crumble. Failure becomes an event, not a definition. Pain becomes an experience, not an identity. Instead of I am broken, it becomes there is pain now, and it will change. The burden lightens because the self is no longer the container for all suffering. The same is true of joy. When you cling to joy as my joy, you fear its loss. You try to freeze it, turning a living experience into a possession. But when self is empty, joy flows freely. You savor it as a passing gift, not as something you must own. This makes joy purer, because it is no longer weighed down by fear of loss. You are not its owner, you are its witness. Seeing the emptiness of self also transforms relationships. Much conflict arises from defending the ego. You feel insulted and rush to retaliate, not because of the words themselves, but because your identity feels threatened. You cling to being right, being respected, being important. But when the self is not clung to, the sting of insult fades. Words still arrive, but they do not pierce as deeply because there is no fixed self to be wounded. This does not make you weak, it makes you free. You can respond with clarity instead of reflex, with compassion instead of pride. In modern life, the illusion of self is reinforced constantly. Social media encourages carefully curated identities, a polished version of who you are. Careers often become identities. I am my job. Relationships too. I am defined by who loves me. But when these crumble, as they inevitably do, the pain feels unbearable because you have mistaken conditions for essence. To see the self as empty is to see that you are not your profile, not your job, not your roles. These are temporary garments, not the core of your being. The core is spacious, fluid, undefined. Meditation offers a direct way to experience this. Sit quietly and observe your thoughts. Notice how they arise unbidden, how they pass without control. You do not choose the next thought, it appears. When you try to grasp it as my thought, it slips away. Notice how the body breathes on its own, how sensations arise and dissolve without command. Where is the permanent self in all this? There is awareness, yes, but not a fixed owner. The self reveals itself as a stream, not a stone. This insight does not erase individuality. You still have memories, preferences, talents, and quirks, but you stop mistaking them for something unchanging. Like a wave on the ocean, you exist uniquely, yet inseparably from the sea. The wave is not independent, it is ocean taking a temporary form. Likewise, you are life taking this form for a time. Seeing this loosens the need to cling so tightly to who you think you are. The emptiness of self also brings humility. You realize that pride in a fixed identity, intelligence, beauty, success, is fragile, because none of these qualities are permanent. They shift, decline, or vanish with time. When you let go of claiming them as me or mine, arrogance fades. But this same realization brings deep compassion. You see that others cling to their identities too, suffering under the same illusions. Instead of judging, you understand. Instead of competing, you connect. Freedom from identity clinging also opens creativity. When you no longer box yourself in, I am not artistic, I am not capable of change, you discover possibilities you once denied. The fluid self can learn, adapt, and grow endlessly, because it is not constrained by a fixed story. This is why great transformations are possible at any age. The self is never finished. To see it as empty is to see it as spacious, a field open to renewal. In times of crisis, this insight becomes a lifeline. Illness, loss, and failure often feel unbearable because they attack the identity you hold. I am healthy. I am successful. I am loved. When those conditions collapse, suffering doubles, the pain of loss plus the collapse of identity. But when you see self as empty, crisis does not destroy who you are, because who you are is not confined to any one condition. You are larger than your roles, larger than your labels. This recognition gives resilience. You bend, but you do not shatter. Even death looks different through this lens. If the self is not fixed, death is not the annihilation of an entity, but the transformation of conditions. The body returns to earth, breath to air, energy to life. The story of I dissolves, but the continuation flows on. Clinging to self makes death terrifying. Releasing self makes death part of the natural rhythm. Acceptance becomes possible because there is nothing to lose that was ever truly permanent. Daily practice can nurture this insight in gentle ways. When hurt, pause and ask, who is the I that feels attacked? Is it a story, a role, an image? When proud, ask, who is the I that demands recognition? Is it stable or already shifting? These reflections do not deny experience, they deepen it by stripping away illusion. Over time, you stop building a prison of identity and begin to live with more ease. The empty self is not a void but a doorway. Beyond the clinging to who you think you are, there is spaciousness, freedom, and acceptance. Both joy and suffering can be met without fear, because you no longer tie them to an unchanging me. They pass through awareness like clouds across the sky, and awareness itself remains open, boundless, unscarred. This freedom is not abstract. It changes how you speak, how you love, how you meet each day. It allows you to live lightly, carrying neither the burden of inflated pride nor the weight of crushing shame. It allows you to care deeply for others without being trapped by defensiveness. And most of all, it allows you to meet life with acceptance, not the acceptance of resignation, but the acceptance born of knowing that you are not a solid stone resisting the river, but part of the river itself, flowing, changing, alive. When the walls of self loosen and identity is no longer a prison, something unexpected happens. You begin to see others differently too. Without the heavy burden of clinging to me and mine, there is more space to notice the humanity in those around you. Yet this new openness quickly runs into the most difficult test. What about the people who trigger your deepest resistance? The ones who insult you, betray you, or embody everything you dislike? This is where the radical practice of loving kindness, or metta, enters. It is not about sentimental feelings or forcing yourself to like everyone. It is about training the heart to release hostility and cultivate goodwill, even toward those who stir up anger or fear. Loving kindness begins with a simple truth. Anger and hatred harm you first. When you hold resentment, the body tenses, the mind burns, and peace slips away. The person who hurt you may not even notice your anger, but you carry the poison in your own heart. By practicing metta, you free yourself from this burden. You are not excusing harm or denying injustice. You are choosing not to let hatred control your life. Loving kindness is the medicine that cleanses bitterness, replacing it with the strength of compassion. This practice is radical because it goes against instinct. Instinct says, repay harm with harm, insult with insult, rejection with rejection. But Buddhism teaches that cycles of retaliation never end suffering. They only deepen it. Metta interrupts the cycle. When you direct goodwill toward someone who has wronged you, you are not agreeing with their actions. You are recognizing that beneath their behavior lies a being who, like you, longs for happiness and freedom from pain. By connecting with that deeper truth, you prevent hatred from taking root in yourself. To cultivate this, practice begins with those easy to love. You extend kind wishes to yourself, then to a friend, then to someone neutral. Once the heart is steady, you move toward those who are difficult. You may silently say, "May you be safe, may you be healthy, may you live with ease." At first, the words may feel hollow or forced, especially when directed at someone who has caused you suffering. But over time, repetition softens resistance. Even if you cannot feel love for them, you can at least wish for them not to suffer. This small opening plants the seed of transformation. Scientific research supports this. Studies show that practicing loving-kindness meditation reduces anger, increases empathy, and even improves physical health by lowering stress responses. The ancient practice is not just philosophy, it has measurable effects on body and mind. When you release hostility, your nervous system relaxes. Your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens, your body finds ease. Loving kindness heals both emotional wounds and physical tension. This does not mean letting others walk over you. Loving kindness is not weakness. In fact, it gives you the clarity to set boundaries without hatred. You can say no firmly, protect yourself, and act for justice without carrying the corrosive weight of anger. Hatred clouds judgment and fuels destructive actions. Compassion clears the mind and allows wise decisions. Metta makes strength more stable because it is not driven by rage but by care for all, including yourself. Loving kindness toward the difficult ones also reveals something hidden. Those who cause harm are themselves suffering. A person full of peace does not lash out in cruelty. A person who is deeply whole does not exploit others. Behind harsh words and harmful acts often lies fear, insecurity, trauma, or ignorance. This does not excuse harm, but it explains why compassion is possible. When you see their suffering, you recognize that their actions are not born from strength, but from pain. To wish them healing is to break free of the illusion that they are simply enemies. Metta also dissolves the illusion of separation. When you cultivate kindness for those you resist, you see how interconnected you truly are. Their suffering ripples into your life, and your response ripples into theirs. By sending goodwill instead of hatred, you shift the entire web of connection. Even if they never change, your heart changes, and that change spreads outward through your words, actions, and presence. In daily life, opportunities to practice abound. When a driver cuts you off in traffic, instead of cursing, you can breathe and silently wish them safety. When a colleague undermines you, you can respond firmly but also hold the thought, "May you find peace." When political or social figures provoke anger, instead of feeding endless resentment, you can wish for them to awaken to wisdom. These practices do not erase accountability, but they free you from being consumed by hatred. Over time, loving kindness reshapes perception. Those who once seemed threatening become human in your eyes. You see their vulnerability, their confusion, their longing for happiness. Even if you must keep distance, the hostility within you lessens. You carry less bitterness, less weight, more space for peace. This is not only good for you, it changes how you relate to the world. Your presence becomes softer, kinder, more trustworthy. Others feel safer around you, and connection deepens. In the Buddhist path, extending loving kindness to the difficult ones is considered one of the highest practices. It is easy to love those who love you. It is natural to care for those who bring joy. But to wish well for those who bring pain is to touch true liberation. It means you are no longer bound by the push and pull of like and dislike, friend and enemy. You have moved beyond reaction into freedom. There are stories of great teachers who embodied this practice fully. Some greeted their oppressors with kindness, refusing to let hatred poison their hearts even in prison or exile. Their strength came not from passivity, but from the unshakable understanding that compassion disarms hatred more effectively than retaliation ever could. Their lives remind us that loving kindness is not naive. It is a radical form of courage. For you, this path may begin with small steps. You may not feel able to wish happiness for someone who betrayed you, but you can start by wishing them freedom from suffering. You may not feel warmth for someone who insulted you, but you can start by releasing the desire for their harm. With time, these small shifts expand. The heart becomes wider, able to hold even those once thought impossible to forgive. The practice also deepens self-compassion. Often the most difficult person to extend kindness to is yourself. You may hold grudges against your own mistakes, carry shame, or believe you are unworthy of love. By practicing metta toward yourself alongside others, you heal both directions. You see that kindness is not selective, it flows inward and outward equally. As your own self-resentment dissolves, extending kindness to others, even the difficult ones, becomes more natural. Loving kindness is not about changing others, it is about transforming your own heart. Whether or not those who hurt you ever soften, you can release the chains of hatred within yourself. This is the true victory, not conquering others, but conquering anger. In this victory lies freedom, the kind of acceptance that allows you to live without bitterness. When the heart learns to extend goodwill without condition, acceptance deepens into a state where joy and suffering are both held gently. You are no longer trapped by the demand that others must be different for you to be at peace. You meet them as they are, with firmness when needed, but with kindness always. And in this radical shift, life itself becomes lighter, relationships become less burdened, and the world begins to feel less hostile. From the emptiness of self to the fullness of compassion, the path unfolds. And with each step, you move closer to a freedom that does not depend on perfection, agreement, or control only on the boundless strength of a heart that chooses kindness, even where it is hardest to give. When the heart softens toward even the most difficult people, something profound changes. The world no longer feels like a battlefield where enemies must be defeated. Instead, it becomes a place where every encounter, even the painful ones, holds the potential for growth. Yet, there is still the question of why life seems to bring the same struggles again and again. The same arguments repeat, the same cravings return, the same fears resurface. It can feel like a trap, a cycle you cannot escape. In Buddhist teaching, this cycle is called samsara. But here lies a hidden truth. Samsara is not only prison, it is also teacher. What feels like endless repetition is in fact the very ground where awakening can occur. Samsara is often described as the cycle of birth and death, fueled by craving and ignorance. But it is not limited to physical rebirths. It is present in every moment you cling to desire or resist reality. Each time you grasp for what cannot last or push away what has already come, you step into the wheel of samsara. This wheel spins endlessly, not because the world forces it upon you, but because the mind keeps turning it. To see samsara clearly is the first step toward freedom. What makes samsara so painful is not the cycle itself, but the blindness to its patterns. Stress, anger, and craving return again and again because you have not yet learned what they are trying to show. A repeated lesson is not punishment, but an invitation. When the same difficulty arises, you are given another chance to respond differently, to see with new eyes, to grow in wisdom. Samsara teaches through repetition, offering the same classroom until the lesson is understood. Consider daily frustrations. Perhaps you feel irritation at the same colleague, resentment at the same family member, or anxiety about the same financial worries. Each time the cycle repeats, you suffer. But if you pause and ask, "What is this showing me?" the cycle transforms. You may discover that irritation is pointing to your own need for control, or that resentment is revealing unhealed pain, or that anxiety is calling for deeper trust. Samsara does not hold you because it is cruel. It holds you because you have not yet seen through it. Once you see, the grip weakens. The Buddha compared samsara to a wheel with many spokes, each representing different forms of suffering. But he also taught that the very recognition of this wheel can bring liberation. When you see that the cycle is not random but patterned, you gain power. Awareness interrupts the blind repetition. Instead of being dragged along, you begin to step back and observe. This observation is itself a form of awakening, because it replaces compulsion with choice. Samsara also reveals impermanence in action. No cycle lasts forever, no matter how strong. Even the darkest storm eventually passes. When you feel trapped, it is because you mistake the current cycle for eternity. But by remembering impermanence, you see that every phase will shift. This brings patience and endurance. You stop fighting the cycle and start learning from it. Another hidden gift of samsara is compassion. When you recognize your own entanglement, you realize that everyone else is caught too. No one escapes cycles of desire, fear, and suffering. This recognition dissolves judgment. Instead of condemning others for their flaws, you see that they are struggling within their own patterns, just as you are. Compassion naturally arises because samsara is a shared human condition. The cycles also show the danger of chasing external solutions. Many believe that the next achievement, the next relationship, the next purchase will finally end dissatisfaction. Yet, once gained, the craving returns. Samsara teaches that lasting peace does not come from rearranging conditions, but from changing your relationship to them. The cycle breaks not by controlling the world, but by seeing through the illusion that control will bring fulfillment. Mindfulness practice offers a way to engage with samsara as teacher. By watching thoughts and emotions as they arise, you begin to notice patterns. Anger often follows unmet expectations. Fear often follows uncertainty. Desire often follows boredom or insecurity. When you observe these links without judgment, you see that the wheel is mechanical, not mysterious. Each cause produces its effect. And when you change the cause by responding with awareness instead of habit, the effect changes. This is how samsara becomes a path to awakening. Even suffering itself becomes a teacher in this view. Pain is often the sharpest pointer to truth, because it forces you to notice what you usually avoid. Physical illness may teach the fragility of the body. Heartbreak may teach the limits of attachment. Failure may teach humility. These lessons are not cruel punishments, but pathways to deeper freedom. Without them, wisdom would remain abstract. With them, wisdom becomes embodied. In this way, samsara is both obstacle and opportunity. The very cycles that seem to trap you are also the conditions that can awaken you. Each repetition is a doorway. The key is whether you walk through it blindly, repeating old habits, or walk through it with awareness, learning what it has to show. Modern life makes samsara visible in new forms. Technology creates cycles of constant distraction with endless scrolling, checking, and consuming. Work creates cycles of stress and exhaustion. Relationships create cycles of conflict and reconciliation. Instead of rejecting these as mere problems, you can see them as mirrors. Each cycle reflects your own mind, your cravings, fears, and attachments. By studying them closely, you turn everyday life into spiritual practice. Samsara also trains resilience. By facing cycles again and again, you develop patience and strength. Each time you return to suffering with awareness, the sting lessens. You discover that you can endure more than you thought, and that endurance brings freedom. The wheel of samsara may keep turning, but you no longer cling to its motion. You ride it with balance, like a skilled traveler who knows the terrain. At its core, samsara reveals that awakening is not somewhere else. It is not a distant paradise or a future reward. It is found right in the middle of this messy, repetitive life. Every frustration, every craving, every cycle is an invitation to wake up. When you see this, life stops being a trap and becomes a teacher. You stop asking, "How can I escape this?" and start asking, "What can I learn here?" The great shift comes when you realize that freedom is not in breaking the wheel, but in seeing through it. The wheel may spin, but you no longer identify with its motion. You become the awareness that watches, the still point at the center of the turning. In that stillness, samsara loses its power to imprison. It continues, but you are free, and this freedom is acceptance at its deepest. You no longer demand that life stop repeating its lessons. You meet them with openness, knowing that each cycle is part of the path. In this way, samsara itself becomes the ground of awakening. What once felt like endless prison walls reveal themselves as doors, doors that open into wisdom, compassion, and unshakable peace. When the cycles of samsara are seen as teachers rather than punishments, a subtle freedom arises. You stop feeling trapped by repetition and begin to view each return of craving, fear, or suffering as a lesson waiting to be learned. Yet some of the deepest lessons appear not in solitude but in connection. Nowhere do our attachments reveal themselves more vividly than in love. Relationships bring joy, but they also expose clinging, fear of loss, and the desperate need to control. The heart wants to hold tightly, yet that very tightness suffocates love. Buddhism offers a radical approach to discover freedom not by withdrawing from love, and not by drowning in attachment, but by walking the middle path of non-attachment in love. Non-attachment in love is often misunderstood. People hear it and assume it means detachment, coldness, or indifference. But non-attachment does not mean loving less. It means loving more freely. When you release the need to possess or control, love becomes spacious. It is no longer about feeding the ego or filling emptiness. It becomes about honoring the other person as they are, without making them responsible for your wholeness. This form of love is deeper because it is not clouded by fear. Attachment in love often arises from insecurity. You fear being abandoned, so you cling. You fear being unseen, so you demand proof. You fear change, so you try to freeze the relationship. These fears create chains: jealousy, control, constant anxiety. The love itself may be real, but it is wrapped in grasping, which slowly erodes trust and freedom. Non-attachment breaks these chains by reminding you that no person can guarantee permanent security. People, like everything else, are impermanent. They change, grow, move, and eventually pass away. To demand permanence from them is to fight reality. When you embrace non-attachment, you still love, but without illusions. You appreciate each moment together without needing to turn it into a promise of forever. You cherish their presence while accepting their freedom. This does not weaken commitment. It strengthens it, because it is built on choice, not compulsion. You stay together not because you are chained, but because you continue to choose each other moment by moment. This way of loving also transforms conflict. Attachment fuels defensiveness. You fight to protect the image of the relationship, to be right, to win. Non-attachment lets you step back. You see that disagreement is not a threat to your identity or proof of rejection. It is simply two perspectives meeting. From this space, listening becomes easier, forgiveness becomes natural, and reconciliation becomes possible. The bond grows stronger, not by avoiding conflict, but by meeting it without fear. Non-attachment also honors individuality. When you cling, you often try to mold the other person into what you want them to be. But real love respects difference. It allows the other to change, to grow, even in directions that surprise you. Non-attachment says, "I do not own you, and you do not own me." We walk together, but we are also free. This freedom is not distance, it is respect. It creates trust, because both partners know they are loved for who they truly are, not for how well they fit an expectation. In friendships, family bonds, and romantic partnerships, this truth applies equally. Parents often cling to children, fearing their independence. Friends may cling to each other, fearing change. Lovers may cling out of fear of loneliness. Each form of clinging brings suffering because it resists the natural flow of life. Non-attachment allows these relationships to breathe. Children can grow without guilt. Friends can drift and reconnect. Lovers can deepen without fear. This practice does not come easily. The mind equates letting go with losing. But letting go in love is not rejection, it is acceptance. It is the willingness to allow love to be what it is, fluid, alive, and changing. By letting go of control, you create the conditions for love to thrive. Non-attachment in love also strengthens compassion. When you stop making others responsible for your happiness, you begin to see their happiness as equally important. You wish for their well-being, even when it does not directly serve you. This is metta applied to relationships, wanting others to be safe, joyful, and at peace, whether or not it benefits you. This kind of love is selfless, but it is not self-neglecting. It flows outward because you no longer need to fill an emptiness inside. Meditation supports this practice. By observing the mind's cravings and fears, you see how attachment arises. You notice the urge to control, the fear of abandonment, the longing for reassurance. Instead of acting on these impulses, you sit with them. Over time, they lose their grip. You realize that the love beneath them does not depend on clinging. It exists naturally when the heart is open. Non-attachment also shifts how you handle endings. Relationships may end through distance, change, or death. If you are attached, the end feels like the destruction of self. But with non-attachment, endings are honored as part of the flow. The love shared is not erased. It becomes part of you, part of the other, part of the web of interbeing. Grief is still present, but it is softened by gratitude. You do not cling to what cannot remain. You cherish what was given. In the modern world, where relationships are often entangled with possession and status, this practice is especially urgent. Society teaches that love is about ownership. My partner, my family, my children. Non-attachment reveals a different truth. Love is about connection, not possession. You do not own another's life, you share in it for a time. This perspective changes not only how you love, but how you live. The freedom of non-attachment also makes joy more abundant. Instead of fearing loss, you savor presence. Instead of tightening around every moment, you open to it. Love becomes less about clinging and more about celebrating. You celebrate the laughter, the touch, the shared silence, without demanding that it last forever. And paradoxically, by not demanding permanence, you experience greater depth in the moment. Practicing non-attachment does not mean suppressing emotions. You still feel longing, joy, sadness, and grief, but you do not cling to them as proof of identity. You let them rise and fall, just as relationships rise and fall. In this openness, you discover resilience. You can love fully, knowing that change is inevitable, because you no longer see change as a threat. This way of love invites you to expand beyond the narrow circle of personal relationships. When you practice non-attachment, your capacity for love grows to include strangers, communities, and even the natural world. You begin to care not because of possession, but because of connection. Love becomes universal, not limited to mine and yours. It becomes a way of being. Non-attachment in love is not about loving less, but about loving without fear. It frees you from jealousy, control, and insecurity, while opening you to respect, compassion, and joy. It does not make you cold. It makes you steady. It does not distance you. It deepens connection. By walking this path, you transform relationships into spaces of freedom rather than chains of clinging. When viewed this way, love becomes not a source of suffering, but a path to awakening. It teaches patience, humility, and compassion. It shows you how to hold without grasping, to give without expecting, to accept without demanding. This is the radical freedom of non-attachment, the ability to love fully, to let love flow, and to remain free even in the face of change. And in that freedom, acceptance blooms, not as resignation, but as the natural state of a heart that knows love is not about holding on, but about opening wide enough to let it live. When love is freed from possession and softened by non-attachment, the heart discovers that every moment in relationship is alive with choice. You are no longer a prisoner of old fears or clinging habits. You are an artist shaping connection with awareness. This insight naturally leads to a deeper truth. Life itself is also shaped moment by moment, not by fate or punishment, but by the creative force of karma. Too often, karma is misunderstood as cosmic retribution, a rigid system of rewards and punishments. But in the Buddhist path, karma is something far more empowering. It is the recognition that your choices, your thoughts, words, and actions are seeds planted into the fabric of existence, and each seed carries the potential to shape the world you live in now. Karma means action, and action is never neutral. Even the smallest decision has weight. A harsh word leaves an imprint not only on the one who hears it, but also on your own heart, which grows more accustomed to anger. A kind gesture nourishes both the recipient and the giver, strengthening the habit of compassion. Karma is not destiny imposed from outside. It is the natural law of cause and effect flowing through everything you do. When karma is seen as punishment, fear arises. You worry about being judged, about some invisible ledger tallying your worth. But when karma is understood as creativity, fear is replaced by responsibility and possibility. You realize that your life is not fixed by past mistakes or predetermined by outside forces. At every moment, you hold a brush in your hand, painting the next scene with the colors of your choices. This perspective brings freedom from fatalism. Many believe they are trapped by their history, family patterns, personal failures, or social conditions. While these influences are real, they are not absolute. Each moment offers a fresh canvas. The past may shape tendencies, but it does not dictate destiny. By choosing awareness, you interrupt old patterns and plant new seeds. A family marked by anger can give rise to patience. A personal past of selfishness can give birth to generosity. Karma is not a prison. It is the opportunity for transformation. The key lies in mindfulness. Without awareness, karma unfolds mechanically. You react from habit, repeating cycles unconsciously. This is the wheel of samsara spinning. But with mindfulness, you see the space between stimulus and response. In that space, you create something new. Instead of reacting with anger, you breathe and respond with calm. Instead of grasping in fear, you open with trust. Each moment of mindfulness is a brushstroke reshaping your life. Karma also reveals the interconnectedness of all beings. Your actions ripple outward, affecting others in ways you may never see. A smile to a stranger may lighten their burden, leading them to act with kindness toward another, setting off a chain of goodness that circles back in unexpected ways. Likewise, a careless word may wound deeply, creating ripples of pain. Recognizing this, you begin to act with greater care, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the invisible web you help weave. Understanding karma as creativity also reshapes how you see suffering. When difficulties arise, it is easy to fall into blame. Blame yourself, blame others, blame fate. But karma teaches you to look at conditions. Suffering arises from causes, and those causes can be understood. Instead of wallowing in guilt or resentment, you ask, what seeds have been planted, and what seeds can I plant now to shift the direction? This transforms suffering from punishment into teacher. In relationships, karma plays out in the patterns you reinforce. If you meet anger with anger, the cycle deepens. If you meet anger with patience, the cycle begins to change. By responding differently, you do not only free yourself, you shift the shared karma of the relationship. This is the creative power of karma, to transform not just your own life, but the lives intertwined with yours. The present moment is the heart of karma. The past is memory, the future is possibility, but the present is the only place where seeds are planted. Each choice is alive with creative potential. Even when you feel bound by old patterns, the present moment always holds the power to turn in a new direction. This is why meditation is so central. It trains you to live fully in the present, to see clearly the seeds you are planting with every breath. Karma also teaches humility. You see that your life is not shaped only by your will, but by countless conditions beyond your control. Yet within those conditions, your choices matter. This balance between humility and responsibility brings peace. You no longer demand control over everything, but you also do not collapse into helplessness. You take responsibility for what you can shape, and you release what you cannot. In modern times, the creative aspect of karma is especially relevant. Societies often promote the idea that happiness depends on external circumstances, status, possessions, success. But karma shows that true happiness is cultivated through inner habits. A wealthy person consumed by greed may live in misery, while a person of modest means who plants seeds of kindness may live in peace. Karma places the source of well-being not in what you have, but in how you live. This truth also dismantles the illusion of quick fixes. Lasting peace cannot be bought, and lasting joy cannot be forced. They grow slowly, like trees from seeds. By planting the seeds of patience, compassion, and mindfulness, you gradually reshape the landscape of your life. This requires dedication, but it also brings hope. No effort is wasted. Every small act of goodness leaves a trace, building momentum toward awakening. Seeing karma as creativity also changes how you view forgiveness. If karma were only punishment, forgiveness would be meaningless, because every act would demand repayment. But if karma is the flow of conditions shaped by action, then forgiveness is the choice not to continue planting seeds of resentment. You cannot erase what was done, but you can stop feeding the cycle of harm. Forgiveness becomes an act of creativity, a decision to paint a different picture for the future. This perspective brings courage. You no longer live as a victim of fate or as a prisoner of guilt. You see that even in the most difficult circumstances, there is a space of freedom where you can choose differently. That choice may be small, a breath, a kind word, a moment of patience, but it is powerful. It plants new seeds that will grow, altering the course of your life and the lives around you. Karma as creativity also reveals the sacredness of ordinary acts. Washing dishes, walking, speaking, all are opportunities to plant seeds. If done with anger or distraction, they reinforce restlessness. If done with mindfulness and care, they cultivate peace. Spiritual practice is not separate from daily life. It is daily life lived with awareness. This recognition makes every moment significant. Nothing is wasted, because every moment is seed time. Even collective karma can be understood this way. Societies too are shaped by choices. Cycles of violence, injustice, or greed are maintained by repeated actions, but they can also be transformed by new actions, acts of compassion, justice, and generosity. When individuals take responsibility for their own seeds, the collective field shifts. In this way, personal practice contributes to global healing. The most profound gift of karma, understood as creativity, is that it aligns with acceptance. You accept that the past cannot be undone, but you do not accept defeat. You accept responsibility for the present, knowing it is where freedom lies. You accept that results may take time, but you trust the process, knowing that no seed is lost. This acceptance brings peace, because you no longer live in fear of punishment or in despair of change. In the end, karma is not about fate, but about artistry. Each thought, word, and action is a stroke of the brush. Each day, you are painting the canvas of your life, whether with anger and fear or with compassion and wisdom. The beauty of this teaching is that the canvas is never finished. Even if yesterday was painted with darkness, today holds the chance for light. This is the liberating power of karma. Not the weight of judgment, but the invitation to create. And as you walk forward with this understanding, acceptance deepens once again. You no longer demand perfection from yourself or others. You only ask, what seed am I planting now? This question is enough, because the answer shapes the future. In this way, karma becomes not a burden, but a path of freedom, each moment an opportunity to awaken and to create a life rooted in wisdom, compassion, and peace. When karma is seen not as punishment but as creativity, every action becomes a seed for the future. every word a brushstroke shaping reality, every thought a thread woven into the fabric of life. This realization awakens responsibility, but it also awakens freedom. You are no longer bound to cycles unconsciously. You can choose what you feed, what you starve, what you nurture. That choice extends beyond obvious deeds into the subtle ways you take in the world. Karma is not only about what you do, it is also about what you allow to enter your mind, body, and heart. Here arises the practice of mindful consumption, a discipline that turns even eating, listening, and speaking into acts of awakening. Consumption is not limited to food. You consume media, conversations, environments, and even the emotional energy of those around you. Everything you take in leaves an imprint, shaping perception and influencing action. The body reflects what it eats, the mind reflects what it absorbs. Just as unhealthy food weakens the body, unhealthy impressions weaken clarity and peace. To live with awareness, you must examine not only what you give, but also what you receive. Food is often the most tangible starting point. Eating is not merely a biological necessity, it is a direct relationship with the earth, with farmers, with animals, with the environment. When you eat without mindfulness, you may consume more than you need, cause unnecessary harm, or numb yourself with excess. When you eat with awareness, each bite becomes an act of gratitude and respect. You recognize the countless conditions that made your meal possible: sunlight, rain, soil, labor, transportation. By eating slowly, tasting fully, and stopping when nourished, you align your body with wisdom. This practice protects health, reduces craving, and cultivates compassion for the web of life that sustains you. Mindful consumption of food also extends to ethical choices. What you purchase and eat influences systems of production. Supporting food that is grown with care for the earth, or that avoids cruelty to animals, plants seeds of compassion beyond your own plate. This does not require perfection, but intention. Even small steps, choosing less waste, less harm, become acts of practice. By aligning eating with awareness, you turn nourishment into a form of spiritual discipline rather than indulgence or neglect. Beyond food, media is a powerful form of consumption. What you read, watch, and listen to enters your mind as directly as food enters your body. Violent, manipulative, or superficial content feeds restlessness, fear, and craving. Inspiring, truthful, or compassionate content feeds wisdom and calm. Many people feel anxious or distracted without realizing that they are constantly feeding on noise. By practicing mindful consumption, you pause before opening a screen or clicking a link, asking, "Will this nourish clarity or will it cloud the mind?" This does not mean avoiding all challenge or difficulty. It means choosing content that fosters growth rather than agitation. Speech itself is another form of consumption, for words shape the environment you live in. Harsh, careless, or dishonest speech poisons the atmosphere, while kind, thoughtful, and truthful words purify it. When you speak mindfully, you contribute to harmony. When you listen mindfully, you receive nourishment rather than toxicity. Everyday conversations become opportunities for practice. Before speaking, you ask, "Is this true? Is this kind? Is this necessary?" Before listening, you open fully, without rushing to reply or judge. In this way, speech becomes less about noise and more about healing. Mindful consumption also involves relationships. The people you spend time with influence your thoughts, emotions, and habits. Negative company that encourages greed, anger, or carelessness weakens your path. Supportive company that encourages compassion, patience, and wisdom strengthens it. This is not about judging others, but about recognizing influence. By choosing relationships that uplift and by offering uplift to others, you shape the karmic field of your life. Even the spaces you inhabit matter. Clutter, noise, and overstimulation can weigh on the mind. Simplicity, order, and beauty can calm it. By shaping your environment with intention, you create conditions that support mindfulness rather than sabotage it. A quiet corner for reflection, a clean table for meals, a few moments without screens all become practices of mindful consumption. This discipline also applies to emotions. You consume the energy of anger, fear, or despair when you feed them with rumination. You consume peace when you cultivate gratitude and joy. The choice of where you place attention is itself an act of consumption. By gently redirecting the mind toward wholesome states, you plant seeds that reshape the inner landscape. Mindful consumption requires courage, because modern culture thrives on feeding, craving. Advertising, entertainment, and social platforms are designed to pull you into endless consumption. Without awareness, you become a passive consumer, filling the body and mind with whatever is offered. With awareness, you reclaim agency. You become an active participant, choosing nourishment over poison, presence over distraction. This practice is not about ascetic denial, but about wise discernment. You do not need to reject pleasure. You need to notice whether pleasure nourishes or depletes. A meal shared in gratitude strengthens connection. A binge of empty distraction leaves exhaustion. The difference lies in mindfulness. By observing the effect of what you consume, you learn to choose what aligns with peace rather than craving. The deeper truth is that everything consumed becomes part of you. The food you eat becomes your body. The words you hear become your thoughts. The media you absorb becomes your worldview. The energy of those around you becomes the atmosphere of your heart. When you see this clearly, mindfulness in consumption becomes natural. You no longer treat choices as trivial, because you understand that each one shapes who you are becoming. Mindful consumption also builds compassion for future generations. The resources you use, the waste you create, the systems you support will affect those who come after you. Every act of mindful consumption is a gift to the future. By consuming with awareness, you not only nourish yourself, but also plant seeds of sustainability, justice, and care for the world to come. In daily practice, mindful consumption can be cultivated through small rituals. Begin meals with a pause of gratitude. Limit media that fuels restlessness. Speak less and listen more. Choose one relationship to nurture with kindness. Simplify your space. Notice the effect of each choice on body, mind, and heart. These are not restrictions, but pathways to freedom. They release you from unconscious cycles and align you with the deeper rhythm of life. Ultimately, mindful consumption is about respect. Respect for yourself, for others, for the earth, for the moment. It is the recognition that what you take in is sacred because it becomes you. When you live this way, eating becomes prayer, speech becomes practice, media becomes discernment, and daily life becomes the path. By linking karma with mindful consumption, the circle becomes complete. Karma shows that every act is seed. Mindful consumption shows that every intake is soil. When you choose wisely what you allow in, and when you act wisely in what you give out, life itself becomes spiritual practice. Nothing is wasted, because everything is part of awakening. And in this way, even the simplest choices, what you eat, what you watch, what you say, become steps toward freedom, clarity, and profound acceptance. When the practice of mindful consumption becomes steady, clarity arises about how much of what you take in shapes the way you give back. A nourished mind offers peace, but a mind flooded with noise and exhaustion struggles to serve. This recognition leads naturally to another challenge on the path: how to keep giving without draining yourself. Many who walk a compassionate life discover the weight of compassion fatigue, the quiet burnout that comes from endless caring without balance. Buddhism speaks directly to this, offering the Bodhisattva's secret, the art of giving endlessly while remaining rooted in wisdom, so that compassion becomes a source of renewal rather than depletion. Compassion fatigue arises when giving is driven only by emotion or obligation. You see suffering, you rush to help, and for a time your energy is lifted by the urgency. But without wisdom, this energy burns like fire without fuel. It flares brightly and then collapses into exhaustion. Over time, bitterness may replace tenderness, and despair may replace hope. The heart that longed to relieve suffering begins to feel trapped by it. This is why the Bodhisattva path insists on balancing compassion with insight, because love without wisdom is fragile, while love supported by wisdom is inexhaustible. The first secret is to understand the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy means feeling another's pain as if it were your own. While empathy opens the heart, it can also overwhelm because you take in more than you can carry. Compassion, in contrast, recognizes suffering with clarity but responds with strength and care rather than collapse. Compassion says, "I see your pain, I wish for your relief, and I will act as I can," but it does not drown in the suffering. This distinction preserves energy. When you practice compassion instead of unchecked empathy, you remain steady, able to support without being consumed. Another element of the Bodhisattva's secret is non-attachment to results. Much of compassion fatigue arises from the belief that you must fix everything. You give, and when change is slow or invisible, frustration grows. You feel as though your efforts are wasted, as though the suffering of the world is too vast. But compassion in the Buddhist sense does not measure itself by outcomes, it measures itself by intention. A kind act is valuable not because it solves every problem, but because it plants a seed of relief. By releasing the demand for results, you free yourself from despair and allow compassion to flow naturally without pressure. Self-care is also an essential aspect of sustaining compassion. Many resist this, fearing it is selfish. But just as a candle must be protected from the wind to keep giving light, your body and mind must be cared for to keep giving love. Rest, nourishment, meditation, and joy are not luxuries. They are part of the path. A bodhisattva does not burn out because they understand that tending to their own well-being is itself an act of compassion, ensuring they can continue to serve others. Without this balance, even noble intentions collapse under exhaustion. Wisdom also teaches that suffering cannot always be erased. Sometimes the most compassionate response is not to fix, but to accompany. To sit with someone in silence, to hold their hand, to listen without rushing. These acts require no grand solution, yet they provide immense relief. Compassion guided by wisdom recognizes that presence is as valuable as action. By focusing on presence, you release the impossible burden of solving all pain and instead embody the healing power of being there. The Bodhisattva's path also emphasizes shared responsibility. No one can carry the suffering of the world alone. Compassion fatigue often arises when you believe it is all on your shoulders. But in truth, compassion is a collective practice. Communities, families, and societies can support each other. The Bodhisattva recognizes this interdependence and works not in isolation, but in connection, drawing strength from the shared intention of many. In this way, compassion is sustained by the web of interbeing rather than the fragile will of one person. Meditation practices such as Tonglen, breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out relief, train the heart to transform pain rather than absorb it. This is not about magical transfer of energy, but about shifting perspective. Instead of resisting suffering or drowning in it, you learn to hold it with spaciousness, to breathe through it with steadiness. These practices expand capacity, turning compassion into a boundless reservoir rather than a limited resource. Joy is another secret of the Bodhisattva. Compassion is often associated only with sorrow, but true compassion includes joy. To celebrate another's happiness, to smile at their success, to delight in their freedom, these experiences renew energy. By balancing compassion for suffering with joy for well-being, the heart avoids being weighed down. Compassion fatigue comes when the focus is only on pain. Resilience comes when compassion also embraces joy. Boundaries are also acts of compassion. To say no when overwhelmed, to step back when depleted, to allow others to carry their share, these are not signs of failure but signs of wisdom. Without boundaries, giving becomes distorted into sacrifice that harms both giver and receiver. With boundaries, giving is clear, intentional, and sustainable. The Bodhisattva knows that endless giving does not mean reckless giving, it means wise giving, guided by clarity about what supports true relief. Even in the face of overwhelming global suffering, the Bodhisattva's perspective prevents despair. Instead of collapsing under the weight of injustice, poverty, or violence, they focus on the immediate moment. You cannot heal the whole world at once, but you can relieve suffering here and now in one word, one act, one choice. Each small act matters because it is part of the larger flow of karma. This perspective transforms helplessness into empowerment, making compassion sustainable even when the challenges seem endless. The Bodhisattva's vow is to serve all beings, knowing the work will never be finished. This may sound impossible, yet it is precisely this vow that frees them from burnout. Because they are not focused on completing the task, they are free to give endlessly, knowing that every act is part of an infinite process. The secret lies in surrendering the demand for completion and embracing the joy of participation. Each act of compassion is a thread in a vast tapestry, and the value lies not in finishing but in weaving. Compassion fatigue is real, but it is not inevitable. It arises when compassion is disconnected from wisdom, when giving is fueled only by urgency, guilt, or attachment. The Bodhisattva's secret is that compassion, rooted in wisdom, renews itself. It flows not from personal willpower, but from alignment with the natural truth of interbeing. You do not generate compassion alone. You channel the compassion that already exists in the fabric of life. In this way, compassion becomes not a burden, but a joy. It sustains itself because it is not tied to ego, outcome, or exhaustion. It is an open hand, steady and strong, offering without clinging. Guided by wisdom, you can give without burning out, love without limit, and serve without despair. This is the Bodhisattva's path, to let compassion flow endlessly, not as sacrifice, but as the natural expression of a heart that has discovered its true freedom. When compassion is no longer a weight but a wellspring, guided by wisdom rather than exhaustion, the heart grows fearless in its willingness to meet the world. Yet one question still lingers quietly beneath everything. Why does suffering remain? No matter how much love we cultivate, no matter how much awareness we bring, life still delivers pain, loss, disappointment, and uncertainty. The Buddha did not turn away from this truth, he placed it at the very center of his teaching. Instead of treating suffering as an enemy to be defeated, he revealed it as the doorway to peace. To see dukkha clearly is to hold the compass that points toward liberation. Suffering often feels like the great obstacle. When grief arises, it feels like a collapse. When stress tightens the body, it feels like a trap. When fear gnaws at the mind, it feels like an endless storm. Yet the Buddha taught that dukkha is not a mistake in the system of life. It is the very teacher that reveals the path. Without suffering, there would be no awakening, because there would be no recognition of what binds us and no search for what frees us. Pain is not proof that something has gone wrong. It is the signal that there is something deeper to understand. The word dukkha is often translated simply as suffering, but its meaning is broader. It points to the unsatisfactoriness woven into conditioned existence. Even pleasure carries dukkha because it is fleeting. Even success carries dukkha because it can be lost. Even love carries dukkha because it exists within impermanence. To see dukkha is to see that no arrangement of conditions will ever produce permanent security. This realization can seem bleak at first, but it is actually the beginning of freedom. When you stop demanding that life deliver what it cannot, you stop being betrayed by it. The practice is to turn towards suffering rather than away from it. Most people resist pain, layering it with stories. This should not be happening. Why me? I cannot bear this. These reactions multiply the suffering. By meeting dukkha directly, without resistance, you discover it is not as solid as it seemed. You feel grief, and beneath it, tenderness. You feel fear, and beneath it, the longing for safety. You feel anger, and beneath it, the wound of hurt. Each layer reveals truth, and each truth leads closer to freedom. Suffering also reveals the nature of craving. Craving arises in countless forms. Craving for comfort, craving for recognition, craving for control. Each craving promises relief, but when satisfied, another arises. The cycle never ends. This endless hunger is itself dukkha, the restless dissatisfaction of always needing more. By observing this, you begin to see that peace does not come from feeding craving, but from loosening its grip. The recognition of craving is painful, but it is also liberating, because once seen clearly, you no longer follow it blindly. This turning towards suffering is not about glorifying pain or seeking it. It is about seeing it as teacher. When you are ill, the body teaches impermanence. When you fail, the mind teaches humility. When you lose, the heart teaches compassion. Each form of dukkha opens a door, if you are willing to walk through it. Without these lessons, wisdom would remain intellectual. With them, it becomes embodied truth. Meditation makes this process direct. When you sit in stillness, discomfort arises: physical aches, restless thoughts, emotional waves. Instead of running, you stay. You notice how sensations shift, how thoughts dissolve, how emotions transform. You see that suffering is not fixed, but dynamic. By staying present, you train yourself to meet pain without panic. This training carries into daily life, where difficulties no longer overwhelm in the same way. You learn to breathe through them, to watch them, to let them reveal their lesson. Suffering also deepens compassion. When you experience your own pain fully, you recognize it in others. You know what grief feels like, so you understand another's tears. You know what fear feels like, so you respect another's trembling. This recognition breaks down walls of judgment and creates connection. In this way, suffering does not isolate, it unites. Shared pain becomes shared humanity, and shared humanity becomes the foundation of compassion. Another gift of dukkha is that it dismantles arrogance. When life is smooth, pride grows. I am strong, I am in control, I am above suffering. But when illness, loss, or failure arrives, pride collapses. At first this feels humiliating, but over time it becomes freeing. Humility softens the ego, making space for wisdom. You realize you are not separate from the vulnerability of others. You stop pretending to be invincible and start living with honesty. Suffering also brings urgency. When everything seems stable, complacency sets in. You drift through days, forgetting the fragility of life. But when pain strikes, you remember the preciousness of time. You see that each breath is uncertain, each moment unique. This awareness awakens energy for practice. You no longer postpone awakening for later. You see that the only time is now. Dukkha sharpens this clarity, reminding you that life is too fleeting to waste. To view suffering as doorway also requires shifting how you speak to yourself. The inner voice often attacks in pain. This means you are weak. This means you are unworthy. Such thoughts deepen suffering. Instead, the practice is to meet pain with gentleness. This is difficult, but it is part of being human. Others have walked through this, and so can I. By speaking kindly, you align with compassion rather than cruelty. This transforms suffering into a teacher rather than an enemy. Even collective suffering holds lessons. War, inequality, and environmental destruction reveal the consequences of greed, hatred, and delusion. While the pain is vast, it also opens the possibility for collective awakening. Communities rise to demand justice, to create peace, to care for the earth. In this way, even the darkest suffering contains seeds of change. The challenge is to see them and to act on them with wisdom rather than despair. The Buddha's first noble truth is that dukkha exists. The second is that it has causes. The third is that it can end. The fourth is the path to that end. To see suffering clearly is not to drown in it, but to trace its roots and discover its cessation. Each moment of mindful awareness loosens craving, and each loosening plants the seed of peace. The path is not escape from suffering, but transformation through it. Ultimately, suffering as doorway points back to acceptance. You no longer demand that life remove all pain. You accept that pain is part of the human condition, but you also accept that peace is possible within it. Acceptance does not mean passive surrender. It means living so openly with dukkha that it loses its power to control. You meet it, learn from it, and let it guide you toward freedom. In this light, suffering is no longer enemy. It is the compass that points you home, the teacher that refuses to let you settle for illusions, the doorway that opens onto the vast field of peace that was always here, waiting. When suffering is seen as a doorway instead of a wall, the heart softens. Pain no longer appears as a cruel punishment, but as a guide pointing toward truth. Yet, even with this wisdom, life does not stop bringing storms. Loss still arrives, injustice still cuts deep, and the world often shakes with uncertainty. The question then becomes, how do you remain steady when everything around you trembles? How do you keep your center when chaos presses from every side? This is where the practice of equanimity reveals itself, not indifference, not passivity, but a calm strength that thrives even in turbulent times. Equanimity means balance of mind, the ability to remain steady without being tossed endlessly between pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, success and failure. These opposites are the waves of life, and most people spend their days being dragged by them. When praised, they soar. When criticized, they collapse. When fortune comes, they glow. When it leaves, they despair. The Buddha taught that such extremes are the root of restlessness, because the mind never rests. Equanimity is the stillness beneath the waves, the steady ground that remains unshaken no matter how fiercely the waters churn. This stillness is not cold detachment. It does not mean refusing to care or pretending to be unaffected. Rather, it is the recognition that chaos is inevitable, but suffering from chaos is optional. Life will bring storms, but you can learn to meet them without panic. When joy comes, you savor it without clinging. When sorrow comes, you feel it without drowning. Equanimity allows you to walk through both with clarity and grace. One key to equanimity is the recognition of impermanence. Chaos feels overwhelming when you believe it will last forever. But every storm ends. Every wave rises and falls. By remembering impermanence, you weaken fear. Even the darkest night gives way to dawn. This perspective does not erase difficulty, but it makes it bearable. It reminds you that no matter how fierce the moment, it is temporary. This truth plants the seed of steadiness. Another foundation is letting go of control. Much of human anxiety arises from the desperate need to control outcomes, to shape events according to desire. Yet control is limited. You cannot control the weather, the economy, or the hearts of others. Equanimity accepts this truth. It does not mean giving up effort, but it means focusing energy where it matters on your response, your choices, your inner state. By shifting from controlling the world to mastering your own reactions, you discover unshakable strength. Equanimity also requires deep trust in cause and effect. You may not control outcomes, but you can trust that wise actions bear good fruit in time. This faith in karma allows you to act with integrity without being enslaved by results. You plant seeds of kindness, patience, and wisdom, knowing they will bloom in ways you may not see. With this trust, you are no longer paralyzed by uncertainty. You continue to act steady and clear, even when the world resists. In relationships, equanimity transforms how you respond to others. When someone praises you, you accept it without arrogance. When someone criticizes you, you hear it without collapse. You understand that both praise and blame are fleeting winds, not truths of your being. Equanimity protects you from being defined by others' judgments, allowing you to remain grounded in your own clarity. This steadiness makes you a refuge for others, because your presence is not reactive, but calm. Meditation is the training ground for equanimity. When you sit and watch the breath, distractions arise. Thoughts pull, sensations ache, emotions flare. If you chase them, you lose balance. If you push them away, agitation grows. But if you simply notice, neither clinging nor resisting, balance appears. This practice mirrors life itself. Meditation teaches that the mind can remain steady even as experience shifts. Over time, this steadiness extends into daily life, carrying you through storms with composure. Equanimity also nurtures compassion. At first, this may seem surprising. How can calm detachment fuel care? But true compassion requires stability. If you are thrown into despair by suffering, you cannot help effectively. Equanimity allows you to face suffering with an open heart without being consumed. You can care deeply while staying steady, offering presence and support without collapsing under the weight of another's pain. This union of equanimity and compassion is the mark of wisdom. Chaos is not limited to personal struggles. It extends into the collective. Wars, injustice, pandemics, and environmental crises shake societies. Many respond with panic, anger, or despair. Equanimity offers another way. It allows you to engage without burning out, to contribute without losing yourself. You act where you can, accept what you cannot change, and hold the whole with steady awareness. This does not make you passive. It makes you resilient, able to keep working for good without being consumed by the turbulence. Equanimity also dissolves the illusion of permanence in identity. When chaos arrives, people often say, "This should not be happening to me." But equanimity sees clearly that no one is exempt. Joy and sorrow, gain and loss, life and death, these touch all. By releasing the demand for exemption, you live with more humility and less resistance. You accept that chaos is part of the shared human condition, and acceptance itself becomes peace. In daily practice, equanimity can be cultivated through simple reflections. Each night, you can reflect on the four winds of life: pleasure and pain, praise and blame, gain and loss, and notice how they touched you. Did you cling to one, resist the other? Did you remain steady? This reflection builds awareness. Each day, you can pause during challenges and remind yourself, this too will pass. With each reminder, the mind grows steadier, like a tree that deepens its roots with every storm. Equanimity does not mean indifference to justice. It does not mean ignoring harm or avoiding action. It means acting with clarity instead of panic, with patience instead of rage. It means standing firm in values while accepting that outcomes may take time. This steadiness makes you more effective because you are not blinded by reactivity. Equanimity strengthens courage, allowing you to persist in the face of adversity. The deepest equanimity arises when you recognize that chaos itself cannot touch awareness. Thoughts, emotions, and events rise and fall, but the awareness in which they appear remains unchanged. By resting in that awareness, you discover an unshakable refuge. This refuge does not depend on conditions. It is present in joy and sorrow, in calm and storm. By returning to it again and again, you learn that peace is not found in escaping chaos, but in finding stillness within it. Equanimity in chaos is the flowering of all earlier teachings. It grows from acceptance of impermanence, from the wisdom of interbeing, from the practice of silence, from the release of self, from compassion for others, from seeing suffering as teacher. It is the maturity of the path, the stillness that allows you to stand in the center of the storm with clarity, strength, and peace. When equanimity becomes natural, life no longer feels like a series of crises to be endured. It feels like a vast ocean, waves rising and falling, yet beneath them a depth that is never disturbed. To rest in that depth is to live with true freedom, and from that freedom you continue forward steady, awake, and unshaken. When equanimity steadies the heart in the middle of chaos, something remarkable becomes clear. The storms of life may roar, but the mind no longer clings to every wave. In this quiet steadiness, you begin to notice that much of what once weighed heavily on you is not as solid as it appeared. Many of the problems that once consumed your energy turn out to be constructions of thought, held together by perception and habit. What you once called a burden may dissolve when examined with clarity. This is the teaching of the emptiness of problems. Difficulties are not permanent walls, but mental constructs that soften when seen for what they are. Stress often arises not from the event itself, but from the story layered onto it. A late train becomes a catastrophe when the mind repeats, "This always happens to me, I will fail, people will think less of me." The problem multiplies because thought turns a simple delay into a personal crisis. The event is real, but the suffering attached to it is constructed. When you see this distinction, a space opens. You can respond to the reality of the moment without drowning in the mental fabrications built around it. The emptiness of problems does not deny that challenges exist. Pain, loss, and hardship are part of life. But the weight of these challenges is greatly magnified by clinging to fixed interpretations. The mind paints problems in bold lines: permanent, personal, overwhelming. In truth, they are shifting, dependent on conditions, and less solid than they seem. By loosening the grip of these mental constructions, you discover freedom even in difficulty. This insight rests on the Buddhist understanding of emptiness. All things lack independent, unchanging existence. They arise from conditions and dissolve when those conditions change. Problems are no exception. A financial worry depends on circumstances of work, economy, and expectation. A relationship conflict depends on habits, communication, and timing. None of these stand alone. All are interdependent. When you see problems as conditional rather than absolute, you stop treating them as immovable barriers. You begin to explore them as processes that can shift with awareness. One way to experience this directly is through mindfulness. When worry arises, observe it closely. Notice how it is not a solid block, but a series of sensations, thoughts, and emotions moving through the body and mind. A tightness in the chest, a rapid thought, a fearful prediction, these come and go. The problem is not one thing but a chain of fleeting elements. When you see this, worry begins to dissolve because it cannot maintain its illusion of solidity under direct observation. Stress also softens when you recognize that problems are often rooted in comparison and expectation. The mind says, "This should not be happening," and suffering multiplies. But who decides what should or should not be? Often, the standard is constructed by culture, upbringing, or personal desire. By questioning these standards, you see that the problem may be less about reality and more about interpretation. Shifting perspective transforms difficulty into manageable challenge or even into teacher. The emptiness of problems also reveals that solutions are often simpler than the mind allows. When caught in worry, the mind spins endlessly, imagining countless scenarios. Yet many difficulties dissolve through small, practical steps taken with clarity. By quieting the noise of exaggeration, you see the straightforward action available in the present. In this way, emptiness is not escape from responsibility, but the removal of unnecessary layers that cloud wise action. Another gift of this practice is the release from identity clinging. Problems often feel heavier because they are tied to self-image. A mistake at work is not just an error. It becomes, "I am incompetent." A conflict with a friend is not just disagreement. It becomes, "I am unlovable." When you drop the story of self, the problem shrinks to its true size. It remains a challenge to address, but it no longer defines you. This shift is profound because it liberates you from the unnecessary suffering of self-judgment. Even large-scale difficulties, when seen through this lens, are softened. Social, political, or environmental crises are real and serious. But despair often arises from viewing them as fixed and unchangeable. When you recognize their conditional nature, you see that they, too, are processes complex, yes, but subject to change. This perspective brings energy for action rather than paralysis. You act where you can, guided by clarity, without drowning in hopelessness. The emptiness of problems also nurtures patience. When you see that difficulties are dependent on conditions, you understand that time is part of their unfolding. Just as a seed needs time to grow, a problem often needs time to resolve. By trusting this process, you release the anxiety of needing instant solutions. Patience itself becomes a form of peace because you no longer fight the natural rhythm of change. In relationships, this teaching transforms conflict. Arguments often escalate because each person treats their view as absolute. But when you recognize the emptiness of problems, you see that conflict arises from perspectives, emotions, and misunderstandings that are not fixed. This realization makes space for listening. Instead of defending rigid positions, you explore the conditions that gave rise to the conflict. From this space, resolution becomes possible, not through force but through understanding. Meditation on emptiness can also reveal the playful quality of problems. The mind constructs dramas with great seriousness, yet when examined, they often collapse like paper walls. A worry that consumed you yesterday may seem trivial today. This shows the impermanent, constructed nature of problems. By seeing this pattern repeatedly, you stop giving problems more solidity than they deserve. You meet them with perspective, humor, and lightness, qualities that dissolve unnecessary suffering. This perspective does not make you passive. Recognizing emptiness does not mean ignoring difficulties. It means approaching them with clarity, without being trapped by illusions. You still take action, but the action is free from panic. You respond wisely rather than react blindly. This balance is the heart of Buddhist practice, fully engaged in life, yet not enslaved by mental constructions. Ultimately, the emptiness of problems leads back to acceptance. When you stop treating problems as absolute enemies, you can accept them as part of the flow of life. You see them as passing conditions, arising and fading like everything else. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It means releasing the extra suffering added by resistance and clinging. With this acceptance, even the heaviest burdens become lighter because you no longer carry the unnecessary weight of believing they are permanent or defining. Through this lens, life becomes less of a struggle and more of a dance. Problems arise, but they are seen as movements in the larger rhythm of existence. They invite awareness, patience, and wisdom. They lose their power to dominate because their emptiness has been revealed. And in this revelation, stress softens, worry dissolves, and the path to peace becomes clear. When the emptiness of problems is understood, life suddenly feels lighter. The weight of worry loosens because you see that difficulties are not immovable stones, but passing constructions shaped by thought and circumstance. Yet even with this freedom, another trap quietly waits. The endless push to improve, to become better, to achieve some future version of yourself that is finally enough. This striving often disguises itself as discipline, ambition, or self-development, but beneath it lies a subtle rejection of the present moment. The Buddha's path reveals a paradox. The very obsession with improvement often blocks the peace you are seeking. Releasing this constant striving is not laziness, it is the gateway to a deeper transformation. Striving begins with the belief that who you are right now is incomplete. The mind says, "I will be happy when I lose weight, when I succeed, when I awaken." Each goal postpones peace into the future. Even spiritual practice can become infected with striving. Meditation becomes a race to enlightenment. Compassion becomes a performance. Mindfulness becomes a competition. Instead of bringing calm, the path becomes another arena for restless ambition. Non-striving cuts through this illusion. It says, "The ground of peace is here already. There is nothing to chase." This teaching does not deny growth. You will change, learn, and deepen. But growth that arises from non-striving is different from growth driven by hunger. Hunger grasps for more because it cannot accept what is. Non-striving allows growth to unfold naturally, like a flower opening when conditions are right. You do not force the petals apart. You allow them to bloom in their own time. This is the gift of non-striving. It reveals that transformation happens most powerfully when it is not driven by the whip of self-rejection. The obsession with improvement often produces exhaustion. People pursue self-help endlessly, trying diet after diet, method after method, but never arriving at contentment. Each success is followed by the next demand. The mind whispers, "Not enough, not yet." This cycle creates constant dissatisfaction, the very restlessness Buddhism calls dukkha. Non-striving interrupts the cycle. It invites you to stop running and to meet yourself as you are. The moment you release the demand for change, a surprising shift occurs. The peace you were chasing appears on its own. Non-striving also transforms meditation. Many beginners sit with the hope of achieving silence or bliss. When the mind wanders, frustration arises. "I am failing. I cannot do this." Yet meditation is not about reaching a particular state. It is about being present with whatever arises. Non-striving allows you to sit with wandering thoughts, restless feelings, or calm awareness equally. Each is part of the path. This attitude reveals that peace does not come from forcing the mind into shape, but from releasing the battle with it. In daily life, non-striving softens the constant comparison that fuels insecurity. Modern culture thrives on the message that you must always do more, have more, become more. Social media magnifies this pressure, showing endless images of perfection. Striving says, "I must catch up, I must match them, I must prove myself." Non-striving says, "This moment is enough." It does not mean apathy, it means you stop measuring your worth against others' illusions. By releasing comparison, you regain the freedom to live authentically. The gift of non-striving also reveals itself in relationships. Striving often shows up as trying to mold others, wanting partners, children, or friends to be different. You push, demand, or withdraw because you believe they should improve. This creates tension and distance. Non-striving allows you to meet people as they are, without forcing them into your image. Acceptance deepens connection, because love is no longer conditional on improvement. Paradoxically, when people are accepted, they often grow more naturally, because they no longer resist judgment. Work and creativity also benefit from this perspective. Striving at work often breeds burnout, because every task becomes a race to prove worth. Creativity suffocates when pressured by constant expectation. Non-striving brings playfulness back into action. When you work without obsession, you find flow. When you create without demanding perfection, ideas bloom freely. Non-striving does not reduce effort. It removes the poison of compulsion. Effort becomes joyful rather than exhausting. Another aspect of this teaching is the release from perfectionism. Striving insists on flawless outcomes, which are impossible. Non-striving embraces imperfection as part of the process. When mistakes occur, they are not proof of failure, but opportunities for learning. This shift dissolves shame and opens resilience. You no longer waste energy on self-criticism. You use that energy to continue living fully. Non-striving also reshapes how you relate to time. Striving is always future-oriented. I will arrive when. Non-striving anchors you in the present. It reveals that the future never truly arrives. It is always now. By releasing the chase, you live in the immediacy of life, the taste of food, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of a friend's voice. These moments, overlooked in striving, become the true treasures of existence. Spiritual traditions across cultures echo this truth. Zen speaks of just sitting, practicing without goal. Taoism describes effortless action, wu-wei, where life flows without force. Christian mystics describe resting in grace rather than striving for salvation. Each points to the same realization. Peace is not achieved by reaching, but by releasing. The fear of non-striving is that nothing will change, that you will become stagnant. But non-striving does not kill growth, it nurtures it. Growth still happens, but without anxiety. The body heals when rested, the mind clears when uncluttered, the heart opens when not forced. Life itself leans toward flourishing when you stop interfering. This is why the greatest transformations often occur after surrender, not after struggle. To practice non-striving, begin by noticing where striving grips you. Perhaps in meditation, where you demand silence. Perhaps in work, where you demand success. Perhaps in relationships, where you demand change. Pause and soften. Ask, what if this moment is already complete? Sit with the discomfort of not striving. Notice how the mind resists, but also notice the peace that emerges beneath the resistance. With practice, this peace expands, revealing itself as the ground of your life. The gift of non-striving is acceptance in its purest form. It is the discovery that nothing is missing, that life does not need to be forced into perfection to be meaningful. By releasing the obsession with improvement, you uncover the natural unfolding of wisdom and compassion that was already present. Striving blinds you to this truth. Non-striving reveals it. In this way, non-striving is not the end of effort, but the transformation of effort into joy. It is not the end of growth, but the flowering of natural growth. It is not giving up, but waking up, realizing that peace, freedom, and fulfillment are not waiting in some distant future, but are here, alive, and available in the simplicity of being. When the grip of striving loosens and the heart rests in the gift of non-striving, life becomes lighter. You no longer chase endlessly after the next version of yourself, and in that release, there is space to breathe. Yet even in this newfound stillness, one truth becomes clear: no one walks this path alone. The journey of acceptance and peace may be personal, but it is not solitary. The Buddha himself emphasized again and again that companionship rooted in wisdom is not just helpful, it is essential. This is the teaching of noble friendship, 𝗕𝗂𝗵𝗶, the kind of relationship that nourishes the spirit and accelerates awakening. Ordinary friendships often revolve around shared interests, convenience, or mutual benefit. They may bring joy, but they do not always point toward deeper freedom. Noble friendship is different. It is not about entertainment or distraction, but about encouragement and truth. A noble friend reminds you of your potential when you forget, steadies you when doubt arises, and gently redirects you when you wander into harmful paths. Their presence itself becomes a mirror, reflecting back the qualities of wisdom and compassion that are already within you. The power of noble friendship lies in its ability to anchor you in the path. When you try to walk alone, discouragement easily sets in. Old habits pull you back, cultural noise distracts you, and self-doubt grows heavy. But with companions who share the same intention, strength multiplies. You are lifted not only by your own effort, but by the collective energy of others. Just as coals glow longer together than alone, spiritual companions sustain each other's flame. Noble friendship also teaches humility. Alone, it is easy to believe your view is complete, your understanding sufficient. But in honest conversation with wise companions, blind spots are revealed. You see yourself more clearly, not through judgment but through gentle reflection. This humility deepens practice because it frees you from the illusion of self-sufficiency. You recognize that wisdom is not a solitary possession, but a shared unfolding. Such friendship is not always comfortable. A noble friend does not flatter or indulge illusions. They may challenge you to see what you resist, to let go of what you cling to act with more integrity. At first, this can feel like discomfort, but it is a discomfort that heals. True friendship does not allow you to remain trapped in ignorance. It nudges you toward freedom, even when it stings. This honesty is a form of deep love, because it places your liberation above superficial harmony. The Buddha himself described noble friendship as the whole of the holy life. Without it, the path is fragile. With it, progress accelerates. He compared spiritual friends to the North Star, guiding travelers in darkness. Even when your own vision is clouded, the steady presence of companions shows the way. In this sense, noble friendship is not optional. It is the ground that sustains practice. This teaching also extends to community. While one close friend may guide you, a community of practice creates a field of support that is even stronger. Sitting together in silence, chanting, or simply sharing meals becomes a form of collective mindfulness. Each person's presence reinforces the others. When you see someone else persist through struggle, you are inspired. When you see someone embody kindness, you are encouraged. The community itself becomes a living teacher. Noble friendship also transforms daily interactions. Even short encounters with wise companions can shift your perspective. A kind word at the right time, a story of perseverance, a reminder of impermanence. These small exchanges ripple outward, reshaping how you meet challenges. This shows that noble friendship is not limited to formal practice. It flows through ordinary life. The quality of your companions directly influences the quality of your mind. It is important to recognize that noble friendship is not about perfection. Your companions will not always embody wisdom flawlessly. What matters is shared intention. A noble friend is one who, despite their own imperfections, points you toward freedom. They may stumble, but they rise again. And in doing so, they remind you that stumbling is not the end. This shared vulnerability deepens trust, because you see that awakening is not reserved for saints, but is possible for ordinary people walking together. In offering noble friendship, you also become a guide for others. By practicing mindfulness, compassion, and honesty, you provide the same support that sustains you. This reciprocity strengthens both giver and receiver. In fact, offering friendship with sincerity often reveals your own strength more clearly. You discover that by lifting others, you also lift yourself. The practice of noble friendship can even extend to teachers from the past. Reading the words of great masters, listening to their teachings, or contemplating their lives brings them into companionship with you. Though centuries may separate you, their voices continue to guide. In this way, noble friendship transcends time and geography. You are never truly without guides, because wisdom is preserved in stories, texts, and traditions that remain alive. This teaching also applies to your relationship with yourself. You can cultivate inner noble friendship by speaking inwardly with kindness instead of harshness, by encouraging rather than condemning, by reminding yourself of truth instead of feeding illusions. Becoming your own noble friend does not replace external companionship, but it strengthens resilience. When doubt arises, you can lean on your own cultivated voice of wisdom, echoing the teachings of the friends and guides who have supported you. Noble friendship brings profound joy. When you sit with companions who share the path, laughter arises easily, even in the midst of difficulty. There is lightness because you know you are not alone. The shared journey transforms burdens into shared lessons and struggles into opportunities for growth together. This joy is not shallow amusement, but a deep gladness that comes from walking with others toward freedom. In the modern world, where isolation is widespread and connections are often superficial, the practice of noble friendship is more important than ever. Online networks may offer endless contact, yet they often lack depth. Noble friendship requires presence, sincerity, and shared values. Seeking out and nurturing such connections is itself a spiritual practice. It may mean joining a meditation group, finding a teacher, or simply cultivating deeper honesty with existing friends. Ultimately, noble friendship accelerates acceptance because it keeps you aligned with truth. Alone, it is easy to fall back into denial, clinging, or despair. With companions, you are reminded again and again to return to the path. Their presence itself becomes a compass, pointing you toward peace. And in this companionship, joy blossoms, not the fleeting joy of distraction, but the lasting joy of shared awakening. Walking with noble friends, you discover that the path is not a lonely climb, but a shared journey. Each step is lighter because it is taken together. Each moment is richer because it is witnessed by others who understand. And in this shared journey, acceptance deepens into something unshakable, a joy that does not fade because it is woven into the fabric of connection itself. When noble friendship steadies your steps and reminds you that you do not walk the path alone, courage begins to bloom. Companionship gives strength, but even with the support of wise friends, one shadow continues to unsettle the human heart, the certainty of death. Every loss whispers of it, every wrinkle or ache reminds us, yet most turn away from the thought, treating it as something too dark to face. Buddhism teaches the opposite. To contemplate death is not to sink into despair, but to dissolve fear. By meditating on mortality, you break the spell of denial and awaken to fearless living. The fear of death often lurks beneath countless anxieties. Fear of losing wealth, status, or health are all echoes of the deeper fear of impermanence. You cling to youth because aging signals the approach of death. You cling to control because uncertainty reminds you of mortality. By refusing to face death, you scatter energy across endless distractions. But when you look directly at death, the fear weakens. What was hidden becomes clear. Death is not an interruption of life, but part of its very fabric. Contemplating death strips away illusion. Many live as though time is infinite, postponing what truly matters, drowning in trivialities. Death contemplation shatters this illusion of endless tomorrows. It brings urgency without panic, clarity without despair. When you know that life is finite, each moment grows precious. The ordinary becomes luminous, the taste of tea, the sound of laughter, the warmth of sunlight. Nothing is taken for granted because you understand it cannot last. This practice also softens attachment. Much of suffering arises from clinging to people and possessions as though they are permanent. Death contemplation reveals that all must eventually be released. Instead of breeding hopelessness, this insight frees love from fear. You cherish others not because you will have them forever, but because you know your time together is fleeting. Relationships become deeper when they are lived with awareness of their impermanence. Meditation on mortality can be done in many ways. Some reflect daily on the certainty of death, repeating, "I will die. Death is certain. The time is uncertain." Others contemplate physical decomposition, visualizing the body's return to the earth. These practices are not morbid. They are reminders that the body is not the self, that clinging to permanence is futile. Such reflection brings humility, reducing arrogance and increasing compassion, because you see that all beings share the same destiny. Facing death also brings reconciliation. Old grudges lose their weight when seen against the brevity of life. What seemed unbearable to forgive becomes small when measured against the certainty that both you and your enemy will soon be gone. This perspective fosters compassion, not because harm is excused, but because you see the futility of carrying resentment to the grave. Death contemplation purifies the heart by showing what truly matters. The fear of death often comes from confusion about what dies. The body ends, the story of me dissolves, but awareness itself is not destroyed, it transforms, continuing in ways beyond individual control. Just as a flame transfers from one candle to another, life flows on. Understanding this continuity reduces the terror of annihilation. Death is not a final wall, but a doorway into transformation. This practice also liberates energy for service. When you no longer waste energy avoiding thoughts of death, you live with honesty. You see that while you cannot control the length of your life, you can shape its depth. Instead of delaying generosity, you give now. Instead of postponing love, you express it now. Death contemplation becomes the fuel for compassion, because you know time is short. Modern culture often avoids death, hiding it behind hospitals and euphemisms. This denial intensifies fear, because what is hidden grows monstrous. By bringing death into awareness daily, you normalize it, softening its grip. Just as night is not the enemy of day but its counterpart, death is not the enemy of life but its completion. Seeing this clearly dissolves the panic that drives endless striving. Death contemplation also transforms spiritual practice. It reveals what is essential and strips away what is not. You realize that awakening cannot be postponed. Every breath may be the last, so practice must be lived now. Meditation deepens, compassion expands, mindfulness sharpens. Each act carries weight, because you know it may be your final offering. Far from being depressing, this awareness makes practice vibrant and urgent. Even joy becomes freer through this contemplation. When you no longer cling to permanence, you can enjoy fleeting pleasures without anxiety. A flower's beauty is heightened by its fragility. A sunset moves you because it fades. Death gives value to life's moments by reminding you they are unrepeatable. To see this is to live not in fear, but in awe. By meditating on mortality, you dissolve not only fear, but also pride. Death is the great equalizer, touching kings and beggars alike. This recognition humbles you, erasing the illusion of superiority. At the same time, It uplifts you, reminding you that you share the same destiny as saints and sages. This shared fate creates kinship with all beings, fueling compassion that extends beyond boundaries. The Buddha encouraged frequent contemplation of death, not to cause despair, but to awaken fearlessness. To know death is certain is to stop clinging to false securities. To know its time is uncertain is to live each moment fully. With this awareness, you become unshakable, because the greatest fear has already been faced. Death no longer lurks as a shadow. It becomes a teacher guiding you toward freedom. Ultimately, death contemplation is not about preparing for the end, but about living fully now. By seeing mortality clearly, you stop postponing life. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to be happy. You stop wasting energy on trivial concerns. Instead, you meet each day as precious, each breath as gift, each encounter as sacred. Death teaches you how to live, and in that teaching, anxiety dissolves into freedom. To contemplate death is to awaken to life. It is to see that the only true security lies not in denial, but in acceptance. And in that acceptance, you discover a life lived without fear, a life rooted in presence, gratitude, and peace. When death contemplation settles into the heart, fear begins to loosen. Life feels more urgent, more precious, and at the same time less intimidating, because the shadow of mortality no longer dominates. Yet even with this clarity, the path can still feel heavy. Storms of doubt, waves of suffering, and the pressures of the world often overwhelm inner strength. This is why the Buddha spoke of taking refuge not in escape, but in returning again and again to the sources of peace that do not collapse when life shakes. To take refuge is to rediscover strength in what is timeless, to rest in foundations that cannot be stolen by circumstance. Taking refuge is not about hiding. It is about choosing where to root your trust. Most people take unconscious refuge in things that are unstable: wealth, relationships, reputation, health. These may comfort for a time, but they inevitably change, and when they do, the heart is thrown into chaos. The Buddhist path points toward a different kind of refuge, one that does not break with time, one that steadies the heart in every storm. Traditionally, refuge is spoken of as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is not worshipped as a distant figure, but honored as proof that awakening is possible. To take refuge in the Buddha is to take refuge in your own capacity for wisdom and compassion. It is to remember that the same qualities that blossomed in him can blossom in you. When doubt whispers that you are too flawed, too weak, too late, refuge in the Buddha reminds you that freedom is always possible, because the seed of awakening is already within. The Dharma is the second refuge, the teachings and the truth they reveal. These are not dogmas but living guides, pointing the way through suffering toward peace. When the mind is confused, lost in craving or fear, taking refuge in the Dharma is like finding a map in the wilderness. The teachings remind you of impermanence, of compassion, of the path that leads to freedom. They anchor you in truth when illusions pull you away. To take refuge in the Dharma is to lean on timeless wisdom rather than the shifting promises of the world. The Sangha, the community of practitioners, is the third refuge. It is the support of others walking the same path, reminding you that you are not alone. The Sangha embodies the Dharma in living form, showing through action and presence what the teachings look like in real life. Taking refuge in the Sangha means allowing yourself to be carried when your strength falters and offering support when others falter in turn. This mutual reliance is not weakness but strength, because it weaves individuals into a web of shared resilience. These three refuges together create a foundation for fearless living. They are not separate from you, but are constantly accessible. The Buddha as your own potential, the Dharma as your guiding truth, the Sangha as your living support. These are refuges that do not collapse when wealth fades, when health declines, when relationships shift. They are refuges rooted in the deepest fabric of life. Taking refuge also has a more subtle meaning. It is about noticing where you run when difficulty arises. Do you seek distraction, numbness, or control? Or do you turn toward wisdom, compassion, and community? To take refuge consciously is to redirect the instinct to run, choosing instead to rest in what heals. This redirection, practiced again and again, builds resilience. Each time you choose the deeper refuge, the habit of fear weakens and the habit of trust strengthens. This practice can be woven into daily life. In the morning, you can pause and silently remember the 3 refuges, setting the tone for the day. In moments of anger, you can take refuge in the breath, grounding yourself in presence rather than reaction. In times of despair, you can take refuge in the teachings, recalling impermanence and compassion. In loneliness, you can take refuge in the community, even if only through the memory of shared practice. Each refuge is always available, waiting to be remembered. Taking refuge also reveals the paradox of true strength. It is not found in independence, but in interdependence. When you rely only on yourself, you are limited. When you open to refuge, you draw on vast sources of strength beyond the small self. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. Just as a tree sinks its roots deep into the earth and draws life from soil and rain, you too thrive when rooted in something greater than yourself. This practice also nurtures gratitude. Each time you take refuge, you remember that you are supported by countless conditions. The Buddha's awakening, the preservation of teachings across centuries, the presence of companions, all of these are gifts handed to you. Recognizing this dissolves isolation and awakens humility. Gratitude itself becomes a refuge because it shifts the heart from scarcity to abundance, from fear to appreciation. In modern life, the practice of taking refuge can feel countercultural. The world encourages refuge in consumption, in constant achievement, in status. To take refuge in wisdom, compassion, and community is to step outside this cycle. It is to say, I will not rely on what fades. I will root myself in what frees. This decision slowly transforms not only your inner life, but your outer choices, because it changes the ground from which you act. Ultimately, taking refuge is about remembering where home truly is. Home is not found in possessions or fleeting identities. It is found in the qualities of wisdom and compassion that endure. To take refuge is to return to this home again and again until it becomes second nature. And from this home, acceptance blossoms, not fragile acceptance that wavers with conditions, but steady acceptance that holds firm no matter what arises. In this way, the practice of taking refuge becomes not a ritual of repetition, but a living act of strength. It is the constant reminder that even in suffering, even in fear, you have a place to rest. And when you rest in that place, the storms of life may continue to blow, but they cannot uproot you. Instead, they remind you of the strength that comes not from escape, but from trust in what is timeless and true. When the heart learns to take refuge in timeless sources of strength, the ground beneath your life begins to feel steady. You no longer rely only on fragile external conditions, but on something deeper that cannot be shaken. Yet even with this foundation, a new challenge rises in our modern world, the crisis of identity. Never before have people been so pressured to present, perform, and compare. Social media magnifies the self into an endless display, demanding proof of worth in every post, every image, every comment. In this climate, insecurity grows louder. The teaching of non-self anatta becomes not only ancient wisdom, but urgent medicine. By seeing the self as fluid rather than fixed, you can free yourself from the exhausting demands of identity and rediscover peace in simply being. The modern identity crisis is fueled by the constant exposure to comparison. Platforms thrive on measuring likes, followers, and attention. The self becomes a brand, curated and polished, yet fragile beneath the surface. You are encouraged to attach to an image of yourself that others approve of. When that image is validated, you feel temporary elation. When it is ignored or criticized, you feel despair. The cycle is endless because it rests on the illusion that the self is something solid that must be defended and maintained. Buddhism reveals a different truth. The self is empty of permanence. It is not an isolated entity but a collection of conditions, thoughts, emotions, memories, roles that shift constantly. Just as a flame depends on fuel, the self depends on countless conditions to appear. Remove or change those conditions, and the sense of self changes too. When you see this clearly, insecurity softens. You no longer need to defend a fragile image, because you understand there is no fixed identity to protect. This insight directly addresses the anxiety of social media. When you post a photo or share a thought, you may feel vulnerable, as though your very being is on display. But when you remember non-self, you see that what others respond to is only a momentary expression, not the whole of you. Praise or blame touches only the surface, not your essence, because there is no permanent essence to be harmed. This recognition brings freedom from the tyranny of external validation. Non-self also dissolves the illusion of isolation. Identity often creates separation. This is me, that is you. From this division arise competition, jealousy, and loneliness. But when you see that the self is interdependent, woven from countless conditions, family, culture, biology, environment, you realize that you are not separate. The very sense of I is inseparable from we. This dissolves the loneliness amplified by digital life, where connection is abundant in appearance but shallow in depth. True connection is rediscovered when the boundary of rigid self softens. Meditation on non-self makes this truth experiential. When you sit quietly and observe, you notice thoughts arising and fading without control. Feelings shift, sensations move, memories surface. Where is the solid self in this flow? Each part is impermanent, dependent, conditioned. The self, once thought to be fixed, reveals itself as a river. When you rest in this awareness, insecurity weakens because you no longer cling to a fixed story. You become spacious, able to adapt, free from the constant need to prove. The modern crisis of identity is not limited to social media. Careers, relationships, and even spirituality can become arenas of clinging. People define themselves as their job, their role, their achievements. When those roles shift through loss, failure, or change, suffering intensifies because the identity feels shattered. But through anatta, you see that identity was never solid to begin with. You are not your job, your status, or even your past. You are a process of becoming, open to renewal in every moment. This recognition restores resilience because you are no longer destroyed when roles change. You flow with them. Non-self also heals the wounds of self-criticism. Insecurity often arises from harsh inner voices. I am not enough. I am failing. I am broken. These judgments assume a fixed self that can be labeled. But when you see that the self is fluid, these labels lose weight. You may have failed at a task, but that event does not define a permanent me. You may feel sadness, but sadness is a passing state, not your identity. By releasing the illusion of a solid self, you stop imprisoning yourself in judgments. Compassion arises naturally because you no longer cling to negative labels as truth. This teaching also transforms how you view others. Social media often fuels envy. Someone appears more successful, more beautiful, more loved. But when you remember non-self, you see that their image too is constructed, impermanent, and incomplete. What you see is a fragment, not their whole reality. This recognition dissolves jealousy and replaces it with compassion, because you know they too are caught in the cycle of presenting and defending identity. Non-self reveals that beneath appearances, all beings share the same vulnerability. Applying non-self in modern life does not mean erasing individuality. It means loosening the grip of clinging to identity as ultimate truth. You still have preferences, talents, and roles, but you hold them lightly. You can enjoy self-expression without being enslaved by it. You can share your voice online without tying your worth to the response. You can pursue goals without letting success or failure define you. This lightness is the practical gift of anatta. It does not erase personality, it liberates it. Non-self also nurtures creativity. Striving to maintain a rigid identity often stifles expression because you fear stepping outside the box you built. By releasing attachment to identity, you allow yourself to explore, to change, to create without fear of inconsistency. You realize you are not bound to a single story. This freedom allows new possibilities to unfold because you are no longer trapped by the need to appear consistent or perfect. In practice, applying anatta to modern identity crisis requires constant remembrance. Each time insecurity arises, you ask, what self am I defending right now? Is it real or is it a story? Each time comparison arises, you ask, am I reacting to reality or to an image? These reflections slowly untangle the grip of self. Over time, insecurity loosens, not because the world changes, but because your relationship to identity changes. Ultimately, the teaching of non-self brings acceptance. When you no longer cling to a rigid self, you no longer need to resist change. You accept impermanence, because you are not trying to protect a permanent identity. You accept yourself, because you no longer define yourself by labels or roles. You accept others, because you see their struggles with identity as the same illusion you are unraveling. Acceptance deepens into freedom, because you are no longer trapped in defending what was never solid to begin with. In this way, the wisdom of anatta becomes the antidote to the modern identity crisis. Social media may continue to magnify illusions of self, but you can walk through it with clarity. You can share without clinging, connect without comparison, live without the constant demand to prove. By applying non-self, you move from insecurity to peace, from performance to authenticity, from illusion to freedom. And in that freedom, life becomes lighter, not because the self has been perfected, but because the burden of defending it has been released. When the illusion of a fixed self begins to dissolve and the pressure of modern identity softens, a new spaciousness opens. You are no longer crushed by the need to defend or perform, and in that freedom, life becomes less of a battlefield. Yet even with this clarity, daily challenges remain: delays, insults, setbacks, misunderstandings. These are the sparks that ignite frustration, the moments where anger surges before wisdom can respond. It is here that another ancient teaching reveals its power, patience, or kshanti. Far from weakness or passivity, patience is one of the greatest strengths on the path, transforming irritation into clarity and frustration into profound power. Patience is often misunderstood. In the modern world, it is seen as endurance, a passive waiting, or even a sign of weakness. To be patient can sound like doing nothing, as though you are simply tolerating what you cannot change. But in Buddhist teaching, patience is an active force. It is the ability to meet difficulty without being consumed by it, to remain steady without collapsing into anger or despair. It is the strength to endure without hardening, to face adversity with a mind unshaken. This strength is born from wisdom. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but it blinds judgment and leaves harm in its wake. Patience feels soft, but it allows clarity to remain. With patience, you do not lose yourself in the heat of the moment. You hold steady, allowing the storm to pass before choosing your response. This steadiness is strength, because it prevents harm to yourself and others, while preserving energy for wise action. Patience also protects peace. Without it, life becomes an endless battle against every inconvenience. The traffic jam, the slow line, the difficult person, each becomes a source of irritation. But with patience, these same events lose their power to disturb. You see them as part of life's flow, neither personal nor permanent. Instead of being dragged into frustration, you remain calm, saving your energy for what truly matters. The practice of patience is not about suppressing feelings. Suppression only pushes anger deeper, where it festers. True patience acknowledges the feeling, but does not act from it. You notice the surge of heat, the tightening of the body, the rush of thoughts, but you breathe, you wait, you allow space. In that space, anger loses its grip, and wisdom has a chance to guide you. This is how frustration transforms into power. The power of choice, the power of freedom. Patience also nurtures compassion. When you pause instead of reacting, you have space to see the other person's suffering. Their harsh words may come from pain, their impatience from fear, their actions from ignorance. Patience allows you to look beyond the surface and respond with understanding instead of retaliation. This does not mean excusing harm, it means refusing to add fuel to the fire. Compassion arises naturally when the heart is steady enough to see clearly. In relationships, patience is essential. Without it, small irritations escalate into conflict. With it, misunderstandings can be resolved before they harden. Patience allows listening, the willingness to hear without interrupting, without rushing to defend. It creates space for healing and deeper connection. In this way, patience strengthens love because it prevents the erosion caused by constant reaction. Patience is also required in spiritual practice itself. Many grow frustrated when meditation does not bring immediate calm, when progress feels slow, when old habits return. But the path is long, and transformation unfolds gradually. Patience is the strength that keeps you steady through the slow unfolding, reminding you that each breath, each step, each effort is part of the journey. Without patience, discouragement halts progress. With patience, perseverance becomes natural. This quality also reveals itself in facing suffering. When pain arises, physical or emotional, the impatient mind cries out, "This must stop now." But suffering does not always end immediately. Patience allows you to stay with it without panic, to observe its impermanence, to endure without collapsing. This endurance is not dull resignation, it is active resilience. By staying with pain mindfully, you discover its shifting nature and its capacity to teach. Patience also strengthens courage. Many believe courage means charging into battle, but true courage often means waiting with steadiness when fear urges you to run. It means enduring discomfort without compromise, holding to your values even when challenged. This form of patience is one of the greatest strengths, because it anchors you in integrity. Modern life constantly erodes patience. Speed is celebrated, instant gratification is expected, and waiting is seen as failure. Yet this very impatience breeds stress, anxiety, and conflict. To practice patience in such a world is radical. It is to step outside the frenzy and reclaim peace. It is to say, "I will not be enslaved by speed. I will choose calm in the face of urgency." This choice transforms not only your own mind, but also the environment around you. Patience also transforms how you see time. Impatience is rooted in clinging to a future, wanting something to happen now. Patience rests in the present, accepting what is while trusting the unfolding of conditions. This does not mean abandoning goals. It means working steadily without being consumed by the demand for immediate results. Patience aligns you with the rhythm of life, where everything ripens in its own season. The Buddha described patience as the highest asceticism, greater than rituals or extremes. Why? Because patience requires inner strength, not outer display. Anyone can fast or perform rituals, but to remain calm when insulted, to stay steady when delayed, to endure hardship without hatred, this is rare, and it reveals true mastery. In daily practice, patience can be cultivated through simple pauses. When irritation rises, pause before speaking. When anger surges, pause before acting. Even a few breaths can change the course of events. Over time, these pauses become natural, transforming reaction into response. Each moment of patience strengthens the habit, building resilience like a muscle. Patience also expands perspective. When you step back from frustration, you often see that the problem is smaller than it appeared. What seemed unbearable in the moment may look trivial with distance. Patience gives you that distance in real time, allowing you to see proportion before harm is done. This expanded view is another form of power, the power of wisdom over impulse. Ultimately, patience reveals itself as a form of acceptance. It is the willingness to meet life as it is, without demanding it bend to your timetable. This acceptance does not weaken you. It makes you unshakable. When you are no longer controlled by impatience, the world loses much of its power to disturb you. You act with clarity, you endure with strength, you love with compassion. Patience is not the absence of power, it is power refined. It is the ability to hold steady in chaos, to endure without bitterness, to respond with wisdom instead of rage. In this way, patience transforms frustration into profound strength, a strength that does not shout or fight, but steadies and sustains. And from this strength, acceptance blossoms, not passive acceptance that resigns, but active acceptance that empowers, bringing peace to both yourself and those around you. When patience becomes strength rather than weakness, the fire of frustration is no longer a force that burns you from within. Instead, it becomes fuel for clarity, for compassion, for resilience. Yet even as patience steadies the mind, another challenge quietly rises on the path. If you are asked to let go of craving, how do you reconcile that with the deep yearning for freedom itself? If desire is to be released, what happens to aspiration, to the longing to awaken, to the drive to live more wisely? Here lies one of the most subtle and profound teachings, the paradox of desire and liberation. It is the tension between striving for awakening and releasing the very craving that keeps you bound. Desire is a double-edged force. On one side, it binds. Craving for possessions, recognition, control, or pleasure creates endless cycles of dissatisfaction. The more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. This is the desire that the Buddha pointed to as the root of suffering. On the other side, however, there is aspiration, the longing to grow, to awaken, to live with compassion. Without this spark, no one would walk the path. To confuse aspiration with craving is to risk extinguishing the very energy that fuels liberation. The paradox is learning to hold aspiration without clinging, to let desire for awakening carry you forward without enslaving you. At the heart of this paradox is intention. Craving seeks possession. I must have this, I must keep it. Aspiration seeks transformation. May I grow in wisdom, may I live with compassion. One contracts the heart, the other opens it. Craving is rooted in fear and insecurity. Aspiration is rooted in trust and vision. Yet both arise as desires. The work is not to kill aspiration, but to refine it, to distinguish between the desire that imprisons and the desire that liberates. This refinement requires mindfulness, When energy arises, you pause and ask, what is the flavor of this desire? Does it tighten the chest, speed the breath, create restlessness? If so, it is likely craving. Does it feel steady, expansive, pointing toward greater peace? If so, it is likely aspiration. By noticing the difference, you learn to let go of craving while nurturing aspiration. This is how the paradox is navigated, not by denying desire entirely, but by transforming it into wise intention. Even aspiration, however, must eventually be released. The Buddha described liberation as the letting go of all clinging, even clinging to enlightenment itself. This does not mean giving up practice, but practicing without grasping. You continue to meditate, to cultivate compassion, to live mindfully, but without the obsessive demand that awakening arrive on your schedule. You practice because practice itself is freedom, not because you are chasing a prize. This subtle shift turns the path from striving into flowing, from restless ambition into natural unfolding. This teaching also illuminates the dangers of spiritual ambition. Many approach practice with the same mindset they bring to career or competition, striving to be the best meditator, to achieve states of bliss, to earn recognition as advanced. This is simply craving in disguise, and it leads to frustration when results do not meet expectations. True aspiration is different. It is quiet, humble, and persistent. It is not about achievement, but about sincerity. It says, "May I walk this path fully, without needing to measure or compare." The paradox also shows itself in daily life. You may desire to be more patient, more compassionate, more mindful. This desire is noble, but if clung too tightly, it turns into self-criticism when progress feels slow. The key is to hold aspiration gently, like a bird in the hand, firm enough to support, gentle enough not to crush. With this approach, you grow naturally, without the poison of harsh striving. This tension can be compared to walking a tightrope. Lean too far into craving, and you fall into restlessness. Lean too far into detachment, and you fall into apathy. The balance is to walk with aspiration alive, but without clinging to outcomes. You move steadily, step by step, neither rushing nor collapsing, guided by vision, but anchored in presence. Another way to navigate this paradox is through trust. Trust that the path works, that seeds of practice bear fruit in their own time. Just as a farmer plants and waters without demanding the crop grow overnight, you practice without forcing results. This trust allows you to release craving while maintaining aspiration. You do not abandon effort, you abandon anxiety about results. The paradox of desire and liberation also reveals the role of joy. When practice is infused with joy, aspiration feels light. It becomes a source of nourishment rather than burden. Joy arises when you notice small shifts, a calmer breath, a kinder word, a clearer mind, and take delight in them without clinging. This joy sustains aspiration while keeping it free from the heaviness of craving. In relationships, this paradox teaches balance as well. You may aspire to love more deeply, to support others, to embody compassion. But if you cling to the need for others to respond in a certain way, suffering returns. True aspiration in love is to give freely, without demanding return. Liberation comes when you act from sincerity rather than from attachment to outcomes. This teaching also addresses despair. Sometimes, seeing the vastness of suffering, you may feel your aspiration is futile. But the paradox reminds you that liberation is not about completing an impossible task, but about how you walk each step. Desire for immediate results leads to despair. Aspiration for steady practice sustains you. The paradox is resolved not by solving the world, but by embodying freedom within it. Meditation on this paradox can be done by observing the breath. Each inhalation is like aspiration, the drawing in of life, the movement forward. Each exhalation is like letting go, the release of clinging. Together, they form balance. If you only inhale, you suffocate. If you only exhale, you collapse. Life requires both, held in harmony. This practice mirrors the path, holding aspiration while releasing clinging, walking steadily toward freedom without obsession. Ultimately, the paradox of desire and liberation dissolves when you realize that aspiration itself is a form of letting go. To aspire to awakening is to let go of ignorance, to release hatred, to abandon greed. Desire becomes liberation when its object is freedom from desire. This is not a contradiction, but a transformation. The fire that once burned with restlessness is purified into light that guides. In the end, the path is not about killing all desire, but about refining it into wisdom. Craving chains you. Aspiration frees you. Craving demands. Aspiration inspires. And when even aspiration is released, what remains is peace, peace that was never far, peace discovered by walking the path with sincerity, effort, and the courage to let go. After walking through these teachings, one truth shines clearly. Acceptance and peace are not far-off treasures to chase. They are here, waiting to be uncovered in the way you see, the way you breathe, the way you live each moment. From the balance of the middle way to the wisdom of impermanence, from the freedom of non-self to the strength of patience, from the power of loving kindness to the fearlessness that comes with contemplating death, every teaching has been a doorway, every step a reminder that serenity is not found in escape, but in opening fully to life as it is. If you've made it to the end of this journey, I'd love to know which teaching touched you the most. Was it the release of striving, the gift of noble friendship, or the courage of equanimity in chaos? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and your reflections may help another traveler on their path. And if you found value in these hours together, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. That way, you'll never miss future teachings designed to guide you deeper into acceptance, freedom, and lasting peace. This path is lifelong, and we'll keep walking it together.